we can begin today's Nantucket Conservation Commission meeting. I will read our remote script and then I will go to the agenda. So hopefully this will be a good meeting for us. As a preliminary matter, this is Ashley Arisman, the chair of the Nantucket Conservation Commission. Permit me to confirm that all members and persons anticipated on the agenda and are present and can hear me. Members, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Mark Beal.
Here.
Seth Engelborg.
Elections office home.
Ashley Arisman here. Ian Golding.
Here.
Dave LaFleur.
Here.
Maureen Phillips.
Here.
Joe Topham.
Here.
Okay. Staff, when I call your name, please respond in the affirmative. Jeff Carlson.
Here.
And then we don't have Joanne on today. Is that true?
She's having some technical difficulties with her computer, so she'll be on shortly.
Okay. Anticipated speakers on the agenda, please respond in the affirmative. And I will just ask people who are currently on to respond. We will have other speakers coming on later in the agenda. So I know I have William Pittman here.
Here.
Patrick Quinlan. You're muted, Patrick.
I am here, as well as Steve Kelleher.
Yeah. And where it says Patrick Quinlan, that's actually Steve Keller.
Yes.
Yes, his name is under my name is under his.
Okay. Sheila Lucy.
I'm here.
All right. Art Gasparo.
Here.
Charles Gibson.
Here.
Tarja McGrail.
Here.
And Paul Santos.
Here, and happy to see Ashley still smiling.
Thanks, Paul. All right, good afternoon. This open meeting of the Nantucket Conservation Commission is being conducted remotely, consistent with Governor Baker's executive order of March 12th, 2020, due to the current state of emergency in the Commonwealth due to the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus. In order to mitigate the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, we have been advised and directed by the Commonwealth to suspend public gatherings, and as such, the governor's order suspends the requirement of the open meeting law to have all meetings in a publicly accessible physical location. Further, all members of public bodies are allowed and encouraged to participate remotely. This order, which you can find posted with the agenda materials for this meeting, allows public bodies to meet entirely remotely, so long as reasonable public access is afforded so that the public can follow along with the deliberations of the meeting. Ensuring public access does not ensure public participation unless such participation is required by law. This meeting will feature public comment. For this meeting, the Nantucket Conservation Commission is convening by video conference via Zoom app, as posted on the town's website, identifying how the public may join. Please note that this meeting is being recorded and that all attendees are participating by video conference. Accordingly, please be aware that other folks may be able to see you and to take care not to screen share your computer. Anything that you broadcast may be captured by the recording. All supporting materials that have been provided members of this body are available on the town's website unless otherwise noted. The public is encouraged to follow along using the posted agenda items unless I, the chair, note otherwise. We are now turning to the first item on the agenda. Before we do so, permit me to cover some ground rules for effective and clear conduct of our business and to ensure accurate meeting minutes. I will introduce each speaker on the agenda. After they conclude their remarks, I will go down the line of members, inviting each by name to provide any comment, questions, or motions. Please hold until your name is called. Further, please remember to mute your phone or computer when you are not speaking. Please remember to speak clearly and in a way that helps generate accurate minutes. For any response, please wait until the chair leads the floor to you and state your name before speaking. If members wish to engage in a conversation with other members, please do so through the chair, taking care to identify yourself. For items with public comment, after members have spoken, the chair will afford public comment as follows. Staff will activate the chat feature on YouTube. Members of the public who have comments or questions can use this feature to communicate with the public body. Instructions are on the town's website. The chair and/or staff will do their best to address questions and comments. And we do ask that if you are commenting on YouTube, that you sign in with your full accurate name so that we can put your name in the minutes. And then finally, each vote taken in this meeting will be conducted by roll call. Okay, so with that, I will get to our agenda. I guess first, there's public comment. I'm not sure if we already have public comment on YouTube.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If I could, not exactly public comment, but I wanted to offer or mention, I noticed that there's an awful lot of folks, very busy folks on for the third hearing item, and I'm representing the first two. I'd be more than happy to go after them if the commission wanted to do that, so they wouldn't have to sit through my two applications.
All right, that's very nice of you to offer. Jeff, is that something we would need to do a roll vote on?
No, I think that's something that if the board is amenable to that, we've made agenda switches many times before, so I don't think there's any issue.
Okay, can I get a thumbs up from board members if we're okay with that? Okay, so it looks like we're okay with that, Art, and we'll bump you down a little bit on the list. Thank you.
Other than that, Madam Chair, we haven't gotten any other real public comment on YouTube, so I think we're all set whenever you are.
Okay, perfect. Well, just bear with me because we do have a fair amount of continuances for me to read through before we get to the agenda. So under notices of intent, Eli Zabar at 47 Squam Road is continued until July 23rd. 46 Shimo Pond Road Nominee Trust at 46 Shimo Pond Road is continued until July 23rd. Nantucket Point of View LLC at 9 Lincoln Avenue is continued until August 6th. 62 Cliff Road Realty Trust at 62 Cliff Road is continued until July 9th. Kim Glowacki at 46 Easton Street is continued until July 9th. ETG Nominee Trust at 6 Old Harbor Road is continued until July 9th. Arthur Schwab at 8 Caroline Way is continued until July 9th. And then Phyllis J. and Donald T. Visco at 67 Easton Street is continued until July 9th. I think that's all of our continuances. So with that, we will begin with the town of Nantucket at 34 Washington Street. And that's represented by Tarja McGrail, Patrick Quinlan, Chief Pittman, Charles Gibson, and Sheila Lucy. So who would like to take the floor first for that group?
Good afternoon. Yep, this is Tarja McGrail with Coastal Engineering. So what I wanted to first introduce to you is a couple of revisions that we made to the site plans that you have before you today. The first revision is shown on sheet C221. That's the grading, drainage, and utility plan. On there now, near the walkways that will be to the left side of the building as you're looking towards the water, we're proposing underground a new drainage pipe with 2 concrete vaults. It'll all be below grade. This has come up by working with the town's DPW and also the engineer that's working on design plans for drainage improvements to Washington Street and the parking lot across the street. They're looking at the entire area holistically to look at making stormwater improvements. And there's an existing outfall pipe on the Harbor Master site that was recently relocated months ago because it was in failing condition. And these 2 pipes with the treatment on it will be the final improved outfall pipe in the future. And so what we're trying to do right now is install these vaults and pipes now so that it's in the ground and we don't have to have new disturbance when they're ready to finally tie in the new improved system for Washington Street and the parking lot. So if you look on C221, you'll see that we show 2 concrete vaults and then dual 18-inch diameter pipe connecting the two vaults. And it's my understanding that one of the vaults will be for additional stormwater treatment, and the second one will be for monitoring of runoff. So it's my understanding that before those go into service, you'll likely have another filing before you from the engineer that is representing that project for the Nantucket Land Council. But what we'd like to ask for is approval to install these best management practices now while we have the ground open with the installation of the new Harbor Master facility. So that's the first revision. The second one came up in conjunction with coordination with the town planning department. They made a request that we retain the full width of the existing curb cut on Washington Street that's in front of the Harbor Master building today, and include an additional parking space that is there today that wasn't previously in the design. So what we've done is we've put that parking space in, and we've adjusted the coverage table that is shown on sheet C211 to reflect that change in the type of coverage on the property within jurisdiction. So as a result of the changes, we are still proposing an overall reduction in impervious coverage by over 500 square feet. Overall site coverage is reduced by just over 1,600 square feet. Part of that is a result of improving the landscape near the dunal area. We're proposing 900 square feet of new dune restoration area. So that area will be planted with native dune grasses so that it is contiguous with the existing dune and provides additional protection for the resource area. So with that, the mitigation proposed and also the reduction in impervious area, this project will be a great environmental improvement to the nearby resource areas. By reducing impervious and raising the building, we're going to increase the ability of the property to absorb flood waters and also reduce this risk of storm damage by elevating the building. That will reduce the risk for storm damage, but also for any kind of debris that could be in the water during a storm event. So at this point, if I could turn it over to Harbor Master Lucy to maybe describe to you the need for the new building and some of the existing concerns with the existing building that has brought on the need for the new proposed facility that's before you.
Thank you, Taria. Sheila, would you like to take the floor?
Sure. We desperately need a new building, and we need it where it is. The bathrooms are the only public restrooms for everybody that's in the Anchorage and in the mooring fields, anybody that arrives by boat. This building in this facility is what they see first. It's their first impression of Nantucket. It also provides a space for the restrooms is the majority of the building and the majority of what we need, but we have office space for the public so that we can meet with them concerning their moorings. We have a storage space to store firefighting and dewatering equipment, oil pollution response equipment, man overboard recovery equipment for the safety of the people that are using the town pier. It's a completely wooden infrastructure, so we need to have the firefighting equipment very close. We need to have the dewatering stuff on site in case a boat starts sinking at the dock. And the oil pollution response equipment needs to be here as well. We're only asking for minimal office space just to get our jobs done. And it's something that we really need. The restrooms have thousands of people in a normal summer going through them. We have cruise ships that pull in here that use the facility. We host the only dinghy dock on the island. So all the dinghies for all the moorings that come here. The town pier is all locals. It's for the Nantucket residents, and it's a facility for them. And it's just something that we desperately need.
Thank you, Sheila. Is there anyone else who'd like to speak for your group before I open it up to comments? Looks like Charles Gibson has his hand up, and then I'll go to William Pittman.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify on the emergency equipment, that's what's shown on the drawing as being in the trailer. And I know there was some confusion about why that trailer was there. It has nothing to do with lifeguard equipment. It has to do with all the emergency response equipment. And the easiest way to have ready access at the dock was to put it in that location. But also, when the storm tides come in, we can easily move it out to not have it damaged. So that's why the small enclosure was there, just to hide a trailer, and that we can pull that trailer out and then put it back in. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Thank you. And then William Pittman.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. I was actually going to say that same thing about the trailer, reason it was there, but I think I also have to point out Sheila was being kind when she said we need a new building. Actually, the building that's there is very close to failing. In the bathrooms and the public restroom areas, the floor is compromised. We've had to reinforce it with some plywood sheets. The understructure is compromised. That foundation floods and holds water whenever the tide comes up as it's currently built. Who knows what's being put into it? There's been pipes broken. There's been all kinds of issues with that facility that are hazardous to the environment. And it is questionable. I, as the head of this department, I am concerned that the structure is just an accident waiting to happen to the general public as it currently stands. It should have been replaced several years ago. All of us are here today mainly because if there's any particular questions that you may have as to why something is where it was. I know we've, in the process of getting to where we are, there were a lot of discussions, a lot of what ifs, a lot of alternatives considered. And certainly you probably haven't heard what all those are, but you know, we're ready and able to answer most of these questions that you may have.
Thank you. So with that, I'll open it up to commissioner questions. Joe?
Has the HCC seen this building yet? That was one of our concerns on the initial meeting.
Who would like to take that?
Not yet. We haven't gone to HTC yet.
Okay.
Ian, you had a question? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Old dog, new tricks, you know. So I don't know if the chief and Officer Gibson are aware of, you know, our principal concern was that having tried to open up the view there as much as possible, we were hoping for a smaller building. So we understood all the dynamics of what you were trying to achieve. And Sheila, we absolutely sympathize. And of course, you know, but at one level, the condition of the building has nothing to do with going forward, the new one that you want to construct. And also, Officer Gibson, we were hoping that the trailer could be opposite on the other side of the road to reduce the mass. So that, I think, for me, that was the principal concerns I had. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I understand that this is a public safety building. I totally appreciate hearing that from the harbor master and the chief. Again, I've raised it in the past, but I'm also concerned about the trailer. I think that having a trailer with a wooden enclosure adds additional, roof. It adds additional impervious surface. And I would like to see some way that the harbor master staff could either incorporate that extremely important life-saving equipment they need into the building itself, or have it across the street off-site so that we could have less impact on the site itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. Dave?
I can appreciate the need for the building and everything, and I'm agreeable to the design. I understand the importance of having that equipment close at hand, closer to the shore. I don't think you would want to incorporate it in the building because we're already trying to minimize the size of that. And having it separate, I think, gives good flow and keeping the area, I think, in a better shape than it is now.
Thank you, Dave. Charles Gibson?
Just on the size of the building, the height has been dictated by the velocity zone by FEMA. We've actually got a waiver to lower that height because it wasn't a VE, I believe it's VE 9 zone. And we had a waiver from the state building appeals to keep it lower, doing some fancy modifications to the foundation. So that's where the height comes from. The building size is being driven by the handicap access code for the toilet facilities. We have to meet ADA requirements for the bathrooms. The number of bathrooms has been driven by the use. So we had done a study a few years ago which said how many toilets we need. You know, in Massachusetts with potty parity laws, you have to deal with male and female sides basically the same way for numbers of fixtures. So with the handicap code driving the size of the toilets and then the number of toilets being driven by the usage, that has driven the footprint of the first floor. You know, and that's why the size is where it is. One of the other issues with the handicap ramps along the sides, again, meeting ADA code, we have to provide handicap access. And that's one of the reasons why the massing is sort of the way it looks. If we had to incorporate storage space for emergency equipment, you know, as was already mentioned, we would have to make it bigger. We can't be, you know, running across Washington Street in the middle of the summertime trying to pull pumps and firefighting gear and oil response equipment, which is why we need to keep it as close to the dock itself. And I believe the architect had forwarded to the board several weeks ago an outline showing the existing massing with the new building proposed. And, you know, the size is not substantially different, you know, to where it is today. So that's just a response to the questions that were raised. Thanks.
Thank you. Joe?
Through the chair to Charlie. Charlie, we asked for that information and it was provided, which is great. And I knew that the bathrooms was driving a large percentage of the program and the footprint. It totally makes sense. And I do agree with Chief Pittman. The building is way beyond its years. It's been passed for about 10. It needs to be removed and upgraded. But what we were hoping to do is have the HCC take a pound of flesh at this, change the massing, because I don't think it quite fits in the Nantucket architecture, and that's my personal opinion. But I was hoping by the HCC having them make comments and getting changes, that maybe the massing might have changed or gotten smaller, because right now it's so large. And I know that you have a waiver because of the flood zone, but you know, there was, I feel like that's a problem we're having. It's such a massive wall. If it could be lowered in height or the massing be manipulated in some ways to reduce the size, it's just going to be a very towering building on this property. So that was why I had requested and asked if they could go to the HTC and then come back. I do know that the first floor program should not change. Maybe as far as massing goes and massaging the plan, but the bathrooms, that's a need of the public, that you need to fulfill that need to the public. And so that's why I kind of was asking about the question about the HTC. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Maureen had a question, and then Ian, I'll go to you.
First, Joe, thank you, through the chair to Joe, thank you for basically asking or making the point that I was going to make. This is really difficult because the town let this go so long, and then you have your hands tied about the number of bathrooms and the ramp and the rest of it. And no one thinks that this isn't necessary, both for safety and for the look of Nantucket and the safety and welcoming of our neighbors and our visitors. So I do think, and like Joe, I was hoping that the HDC would have some comments or some ideas about how the massing might be reduced. Is that, I guess I would like to know when, and I'm not sure, is it Charlie, whoever, when is the plan? You didn't want to go to the HEC until you got our approval, is that right? And is it possible for you to do that before we give our approval?
Charles Gibson, would you like to take that?
Sure. We're way behind with the COVID issues, and our hope was to sort of approach this simultaneously. But as far as HDC goes, HDC won't design the building, for us. They'll either give us thumbs up or thumbs down on it. The issue is the program that came from the study said the harbor master needs, some office space. It says we need a certain number of bathrooms. It says we need, handicap access. The height issue is what's really increasing the massing of the building, not so much of the footprint, the ground cover footprint. It's more the height. And as you just said, that it's a wall on Washington Street. And again, that's being driven by the FEMA flood maps. If we could put the building close to grade as it is now, it would be fairly similar in massing. And I don't know how we can change the program without eliminating what the program says we need. So do we take the second floor off? I mean, that's the only way we're really going to reduce massing. And then that just puts us further behind, because where would the harbor master's office be that's there now? I mean, the second floor space that the harbor master has today is not much bigger in the new building than it is today, and that's just the program for the harbor master needs an office. We need space for the seasonal lifeguard coordinators and the people who handle all that seasonal staff and year-round staff. That's their office space. There is no other office space for that Marine Department staff. So if we take the second floor off, we just have basically a large toilet facility, and that's not what the program is. So I'm not sure where we would go to reduce the massing other than spread it further on the site, which would make the height lower but make it wider.
Thank you. Ian, I think I had a question, and then Mark, I'll go to you.
Yes. So I think we're all on the same page from this. So I mirror Joe and Maureen's concern, because I think that it's, we do have water views in our purview, and I don't like personally the aesthetic of the building. And I totally take Charlie's point about the height, and I'm not objecting to the height because of that. I'm a bit surprised that you feel that Washington Street, would be a problem if there was an emergency, because I would have thought it would be easy enough to stop traffic while equipment was being moved across the road. But I would be much more comfortable if this had, as we requested initially, if it had gone to the HDC. And I sympathize about what's happening with COVID, and I'd like to thank you all for your service, because I know it's been very hard. And thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Mark?
Well, I would echo what's been said about the HDC thing. And I would hate to see it go to the HDC and have them come back and say, do a major redesign, and then come back to us and they want the town to cover many more square feet, and we have a problem with that. There's no question we have to have a new building there. I just have a more comfort level if we had HDC's input, and we know we could approve something that they like and we like.
Thank you, Mark. I know I also agree with my fellow commissioners. I think when I look at the design of this building, you know, I understand the need for bathrooms and the office space, but it seems massive given, you know, kind of Nantucket's mission to open up the waterfront. And I realize that it might seem challenging to get across Washington Street, but maybe this is the first step we need to take in changing the way Washington Street drivers work. You know, when I look at communities that have waterfront access, like a Miami or a Waikiki, those roads that are right along the waterfront are driven really slowly because of the pedestrian traffic that goes back and forth. So maybe this, you know, will require a shift in the problems that are evident on Washington Street, kind of period. But I would like to look at kind of a different configuration to protect those wetland scenic views. Joe?
So I could see that whole second floor just becoming, instead of full 2-story to a story and a half. I can see the HCC, you know, doing some massing redesign, lowering some plate heights. And I get where the bottom floor, that level can't change. But I do think that the HCC is going to definitely push and massage this plan in some way, shape, or form. That's when I think, Charlie, that if they come back and it gets smaller and the massing is kind of minimized, then I think we're going to say, well, that's less of an impact. But I think the design now works great on the Cape. It's beautiful, but it's not going to work in Nantucket. It doesn't work in Nantucket architecture. So that's why I really want the HCC to have their pound of flesh and have you work with the architects to say, can you change this? Can you lower that? Can you work in? There's ways to definitely push this down, and going to them every other week. I definitely know that they're going to have some concerns and some issues, and you know, you're going to have to come back with some redesigns. And I think if you can lower that height and reduce some of the massing and hide some of it in some ways with pitches or sheds or whatever, I think it's going to help our concerns about the massing. I think the first floor is the first floor. I don't think you really can change that, but I think the second floor and some of the added massing to it can be definitely reduced and massaged. So that's where I think it's going to help this board move forward with what you have in front of us. I do understand the safety equipment to being on the side of the road. I'd like to see it on Washington Street on the other side in the parking lot, but I do understand there's a need, an emergency need that needs to be over there. So I would be more in favor of that if the main building got small and reduced in some way, shape, or form on the above the first floor. So it's kind of a balance I'm trying to work out with those concerns that we've all had. And so I agree with Dave on that. But if it doesn't get reduced, then I think that small little building's got to go away. And I don't know if it's a wide speed ramp at the Washington Road crossing to stop people so that the people can pass and go back and forth. I'm not really sure. That's not my concern or within our jurisdiction, but that's just a concerned citizen comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Maureen?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And you made a comment a bit ago about, you know, changing the kind of the environment of Washington Street. And Joe, you were just talking about that as well. Because what it reminds me is that this is all, we all have, the town has to adapt. And if that means that in order to have the view shed on Washington Street that we want to have, and have the space and equipment that has to be done for both, for every reason in the world, that putting, if we put the emergency equipment across the street and frankly changed how people use Washington Street, it's kind of, you know, retreating a bit, but then adapting where the emergency equipment would go, adapting the street so that is as accessible as is necessary, and whether that's, you know, some traffic or street design, or, you know, gross lowering of the speed limits, I would think that might be the better way to skin the cat, as opposed to, going up against all the restrictions that you have for the first floor. So I would suggest, going after that and make it so that you can get at it no matter what, and change the character of Washington Street. Because frankly, it would be nice too for, making it more Nantucket-like, to not have it be as crazy as it is. So that's what I think.
Thank you, Maureen. I know Patrick Quinlan is trying to speak, and forgive me, I'm recognizing your square, but I know it's the other gentleman who's trying to speak. So you guys are muted.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I think you're good now.
Okay. Steve Kelleher, Stephen Kelleher Architects. In 2015 and 16, we worked with the committee of.
He's going to have to speak up. I can't hear him.
Can you speak directly into your microphone?
We did a study for this building back in 2015 and 2016. And basically, the height limitation by the Historic Commission is 30 feet. And we're in a velocity zone, which is a VE11. The site is at elevation 5 to 6. And so therefore, to meet the requirements of the Historic Commission, we went to the state building code and got permission to build this building as a flood-proofed structure. So we could lower the building down and meet the 30-foot requirement. We did that by basically designing the first floor as a flood-proof structure. I'll show you a picture. I'm going to put this up in front here. Basically, you see the blue doors? Those fit in the doorways, the 6 doors that open into the building. The bottom of the windows on the first floor is at elevation 13. The VE zone 11 plus 2 feet. To keep the building within the 30-foot limit, we've only got 5-foot knee walls on the second floor in some of the office spaces. So we've already kept this building as low as we could, and we kept the floor down as low as we could by making a flood-proof structure. We learned how to do this at Horseneck Beach for Department of Conservation and Recreation. They wanted Horseneck Beach has between 12,000 and 15,000 visitors a day. And they used to have a sewage disposal plant, which to replace the 1955 sewage disposal plant in 2010 was going to be like $10 million. What we built was a flood-proof structure underneath a velocity zone building so that composting units could be in a tank 100 feet long by 30 feet long, wide, 8 feet into the water table. And it hasn't leaked a drop since. This building is designed to keep the floor down so it's only 5 to 6 feet off the ground, so that there's not a long ramp, an unusable ramp. And basically it's weighted down so that when the building is hit by a wave during a hurricane, it will resist that dynamic. And we've kept the building at the architectural, in compliance with the Architectural Access Board. We've also made it compliant with the Historic Commission in terms of height, which is 30 feet. and we've kept the floor down so that it's usable by the users of this building. It's approximately 5 feet out of the ground to the floor, but the flood is up another 3 feet higher. So we flood-proofed that structure. It made it, as far as we're concerned, compliant with Historic Commission's requirements. They may have complaints about the architectural fenestrations or whatever, or maybe the massing, but the massing is based on the need that Sheila has for her to make her building and her job workable. And I would just like to say that we meet all the requirements of Concom, and we have no problems going to historic, and we'll do that battle with historic. That's their jurisdiction. We feel we meet all the requirements of the Conservation Commission. We should be able to move on to historic, and we'll do our battles with historic. One fight at a time, or we can do what we did in Swansea on the Swansea waterfront reclamation, which was a $9 million reclamation of their waterfront, and meet with committees in conjunction with each other. But I would prefer that. I think this building meets all of conservation's requirements. I would like to get an order of conditions so that we can move on to the Historic Commission. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Kelleher. I think Dave had a question, and then Ian.
I'm just making a comment. I want to comment back on the safety equipment. I want to paint a picture that I could see happening. God forbid it ever did, but we all know what Washington Street is like in the summer. I personally am a truck driver. It is the basic truck route into town. And I could envision 2 tractor trailers stuck in traffic, stopped side by each, and then there's emergency on the waterfront side, and it'd be like a Chinese fire drill trying to get the safety equipment across from the parking lot around those trucks to do what it needs to do. I think the importance of having that stuff over there, I want to say that everybody should consider that. And we know we're just trying to make a lot of stuff fit on a little site, but it's all very essential.
Thank you, Dave. I think that's an important perspective. Ian, did you still have a comment? And then I'll go to Sheila. Oh, Ian, you're muted.
Sorry. So, I mean, I totally take Charlie's point and Dave's point, but the bottom line is, I mean, in the unlikely, first of all, I mean, it's not that this is going to happen every week. And secondly, the chances of that particular scenario, I would have thought, are unlikely. And third, the emergency personnel are going to have to get there anyway in the first place. And it would be, by the time they've got there in those traffic conditions, it would be easy enough to move, I would have thought. So from my perspective, while I absolutely accept that the equipment needs to be there, I don't see still why it couldn't be on the other side of the street and meet what are our requirements. And I'm sorry that Mr. Kelleher feels that this is a battle and that he talks about battling with the HDC after he's been successful in his combat with us. And I happen to respectfully disagree with him that we don't have, that the watershed view is not within our purview, because it clearly is. And so I don't know how many times we're going to have to ask for them to go back to the HDC, but from my point of view, I would hope they would. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. So I'll go to Sheila, and then I'll go to William Pittman.
Okay, I just wanted to echo Dave's comments and let you guys know that I work here every day and I see what goes on. we have to be on this side of the street. The building has to be on this side of the street. The things that we can see from our office is how we respond. There's people can fall in the water. We have the cruise ships, we have the dinghies, we have that stuff all the time. If we were across the street, we'd never see it and things would be a lot worse. Having the emergency equipment right with us, it's necessary. It's just that Washington Street's as busy as Water Street and Main Street. The traffic is crazy. People wait for a long time to cross the street. That's where the people park that have slips here. That's where the slip holders park, and they can wait up 5-10 minutes to cross. We have, properties across the street as well, just to get to finance and whatever. Having to wait to bring our safety equipment over would jeopardize people's safety. And we have to be on this side of the street. Our office does, to be able to serve the community that we're trying to serve.
Thank you, Sheila.
You're welcome.
William Pittman?
Yeah, thank you. I was gonna say some of what Sheila said. Everybody's beating me to the punch today, but quite frankly, that Washington Street, I'm in and out of that office, practically every day during the summer at some point. And you're essentially talking about 3 lanes of traffic there, and it's going to be worse because they're eventually going to have a bike path that's part of that, or a bike lane. So you've got 2 traffic lanes with vehicles and bikes that are traveling. And if you start running people across the street, and especially if you're talking about part of the operational part of the building having to be on the other side of the street, I think you're creating a very dangerous situation traffic-wise. The worst place to put a crosswalk is in a straight roadway, not in an intersection. It's absolutely the most dangerous thing to do. And what do we have right there? We've got a crosswalk in the middle of a roadway with no intersection. And we just hold our breath every time. So I agree with Sheila. I think the emergency equipment, I've seen those guys respond when things have happened down there. And believe me, a boat fire can be multiple boat fire in seconds, not minutes, like in houses next to each other. Just in the United States, just this year, there's been 3 major marinas that have completely been destroyed by fire this spring alone. And you need to respond and jump on those things right now. What would be best is if we had firefighting equipment on the piers, but for a lot of different reasons, that's not possible. And we also have to be concerned about the security of that equipment during, on a 24/7 basis, and having it across the street is not keeping it in necessarily an environment we'd be able to keep it secure. Another thought is, since I've been here in 16 years, I've heard you guys say that you'd like to change the culture of the traffic or something on Washington Street. All I've ever heard in 16 years is how we'd like to have less cars on the island. So what we do with new buildings is we build fewer parking lots. This building was a good example of where I'm sitting today. It was designed to have a 100 car parking lot out in the front. Everybody said, we don't want that many cars to be able to park there. So they cut it down to 35. Within a year, we're adding another 70 parking spaces because it wasn't enough. And the point is I've never seen the number of cars decline as a result of cutting parking. So we would lose parking putting it across the street. The town's actually exploring in the long term, getting rid of the finance department building over there eventually. Why? Not to build a park, to build more parking. So, I don't think that, even though it's laudable, it's not really doable to change the culture of how Washington Street operates. It's going to be busier, not less busy. Thank you.
Thank you. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I completely understand what the chief is saying and the harbor master, and I'll defer to those professionals who work in public safety for much more of a professional understanding of how this works than I do. I am thinking about it and what Dave said as well. The last thing you want, let's imagine that there's a boat on fire at the pier. The last thing you want is to have one incident turn into 2, right? So, I have an experience in volunteer firefighting, and the most dangerous thing that we do is drive from one side to the other. Imagine driving that trailer across the street while there's an active fire at the pier. I said it before. I was a person who said this initially because I think we need to really do have to protect that wetland scenic view. But now hearing from these professionals, I'm not sure if it makes sense to have that equipment across the street. But I think there is ways maybe to be creative and think about how it could be incorporated into the dock, the pier, or it could be incorporated into the building itself, or it could be cantilevered somehow to the outside. I think we need to be creative and see how we could get the storage space out of the trailer and somewhere else creatively in that building. So if you would consider that, I would appreciate it.
Thank you, Seth. Joe?
So I agree with what Dave has said, Chief Pittman, and Sheila Luce, and of course what Seth just said. I agree. I think that now hearing that the equipment is essential to be there, not it's just lifeguard equipment like we originally heard. But I do think that this is where the HCC is going to come in and really help them massage the plan and get it down and really bring this whole package together. And if it comes back and it's the same exact plan, all right, well, it is what it is. And we kind of, that's what it is. But I think that the HCC is going to want to redesign. They're going to have comments and they're going to have concerns. And so I would prefer them and be happier if they were addressed. Just because we have our concerns about the, scenic views. So let's go have the HCC do what they've got to do and then come back. I just think we're kind of spinning the wheels, but I agree with Seth. If the shed can be incorporated, that's great. If it can be relooked at some way, shape or form, this is why I think the HCC is an important integral piece to this, and it should be step number one. So that's my concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Maureen?
And I understand also what everyone who will be intimately involved with this building and its uses and its purposes. At the same time, I do feel that I want to speak up for, maintaining that view shed. And if that means that we as a town have to finally start making some hard decisions about, numbers of cars downtown, about which roads become, the main traffic routes, to the docks and what have you. Whether we would think ever about having, small warning lights that would get turned on the same way a fire station has warning lights when the big trucks are coming out. And that if there were something that wouldn't be too, huge and ugly, but then it could be turned on so that everybody knows time in the game, stop, because the equipment's zooming across the street. And so, that's the kind of thing that I really think we need to think about, and not just, I personally fear that yes, we will continue to have more cars and therefore we're going to continue to see Nantucket slip away from us. And every time we can do something that discourages traffic and provides a better view shed and a better, welcome to Nantucket for the boaters and everything else, that is where, that's where I think we have the right, because this view shed's in our jurisdiction, and that we should be able to get everyone to think about being creative about this access to this emergency equipment. There are ways to do this. Fire trucks get out of their fire stations and are able to cross the road. And, and if it takes some kind of warning light or something that we don't have on Nantucket, but it's not going to be on very often. I don't know how often there are this emergency equipment is used. And so maybe what I'm saying is completely ludicrous and not possible. But if it were such that a switch could be flipped and the traffic is going to stop and it's going to be clear for the emergency personnel to get it across the street, I would really like that to be strongly considered, because that would be a way to get what you need and what Nantucket needs and what we worry about in our jurisdiction. So thanks.
Thank you, Maureen. I'm going to go to Jeff and then Chief Pittman.
Actually, if you want, Chief Pittman can go first. I'm happy to go second.
Okay, so Chief Pittman.
Okay, yeah, I just wanted to say, Maureen, I agree with you about the lights. That's something that on several projects, including this fire station here, that we've urged to try to get. But the problem is there's a bylaw in Nantucket that prohibits flashing traffic control signals. And I got a feeling that would be, it's probably going to be easier to build this building than it would be to change that bylaw on there. So that's why we don't have flashing lights at school crossings and things like that, because there's a prohibition against those types of devices on the island.
Thank you. Jeff?
Yeah, I just wanted to say something because I appreciate the discussion, and I think everything that we're talking about is really important. I honestly think a lot of what we're talking about is probably something better had with our representative to like the NP and EDC, where we're talking about traffic issues and traffic control. And it's not necessarily, as much as I hate to say it, limiting our conversation and staying to the Wetlands Protection Act here. And I appreciate the scenic view too, and I think that's a little bit more appropriate, but looking at use, but not for nothing on our site inspections there, and having had an office in that building for a number of years as well. The more stuff we want to put across the street and deal with parking, we also have resource areas over there. There's a vegetated wetland that borders it through the Mariah Mitchell property. There's a vegetated wetland in the middle of that parking lot. There's a vegetated wetland in the back of that parking lot. So it's an area that's restricted too. So as we're talking about moving structures around and dealing with that's there, and not to tell a tale or to get too far afield here. One of the main reasons why we ultimately ended up moving the Conservation Commission itself out of the Plus building, which is now the Finance building at 37 Washington Street, was partially related to I was having to cross the street multiple times per day. And at the time, we decided it was better to relocate, be stationary for half a day, then drive back and park at the Marine Department office instead of trying to hop back across the street, because it was just not the most enjoyable task to do, coming by that privet hedge next to the house at 37 for what's there. And I think it's important to keep in mind too, when we look at the property, and I know I'm the first one to always go on rants about we're not a use regulation board, we're a wetland impact board. When we're talking about personnel and being able to do things, there's a good solid chunk of the year, and Sheila can correct me if I'm wrong or I misspeak, but for 3/4 of the year, the staff at the Marine Department is pretty minimal. I mean, you're looking at like 2 to 3 people there a lot of the time, and through the winter, and even when that pier's still in use through scallop season, there are frequently days where it's just 1 or 2 people that are there for a bulk of the day. And if you have an emergency situation where you need extra people, they just don't exist. And that's kind of the unfortunate nature of the beast. I know we've had more than one Marine incident there where you have someone on the phone calling 911 where harbor master's office or shellfish warden is trying to help somebody on the water, and they're waiting for 5 minutes for someone else to come help for backup, and that's it. So I think those are important things to keep in mind, because it's not, the summer condition is tough for one reason, but it's a tough location. And I think that kind of knowing that full situation is important for what we're looking at.
Thank you, Jeff. Ian, did you have a comment? Oh, you're muted again.
Sorry, apologies. But I'm curious as to where the emergency equipment is kept now, how often it's actually used, and can anybody say that there's been significant damage or loss of life because of where it is now? I mean, because I think that's a tangential issue, but I'm just curious. In other words, is 911 called twice a day during the summer from boat owners, or twice a week? What are we really talking about in incidents here? And thank you.
Sheila, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, sure. We respond to something at least once a day in the summertime, whether it be someone falling and someone falling in, someone falling and needing medical assistance, someone falling wherever, or a boat taking on water, or a boat sparking. It's a wooden infrastructure, so it's going to go up fast. So we need the equipment to be right there to go get. But I would say that we respond to something at least once a day. And 90% of the time it's because we're on this side of the street, we see it and we can get to it and handle it. When the cruise ship people come in, those people are old or elderly, I guess is how we'll say it. And we have a lot of medical incidents with them. The fire department is here at least twice a week, responding for either medical or whatever stuff. Right now, the equipment is stored wherever we can store it. But we have it on this side of the street because we need to be able to get to it. And what we're looking for is for a place to store it safely and make it readily available and readily accessible for when we need it. For the people that are on the town pier and the people that are on the dinghy docks, people in the mooring fields, people in the Anchorage. We help a lot of people.
Thank you, Sheila. Joe?
So I kind of feel like, and having conversations with my brother who works for the FAA, he said that every time there's a task or something, it always starts with what if. And I think that Chief Pittman and Jill Lucy are working for like what if. And I kind of understand that their equipment is not currently on site, and I get that. And I think that definitely needs to be there because you never know from time to time. So it's like the roof walk, the poor gentleman that fell. I think a lot of people looking at the roof walks. So I think that they're working from that stance. And I do hear Dave's concerns about 2 18-wheelers. He's driving that street every day, and I'm concerned about that. But going back to the ACC concern, I think that this is the problem. So I think they need the equipment over there, but just let's work on the massing of the building. That's my perspective. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Chief Pittman, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add that as to where the equipment is today, it's where it shouldn't be. It's inside the building. We've got gasoline powered engines and portable equipment stored inside the existing building that the guys walk around when they go to get their gear and everything. That is completely improper. Shouldn't be there. It's a safety hazard, but it's the only option we have right now.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Mr. Kelleher?
Yes, I'd just like to comment that this is a process that I've been going through since 1970.
You just make sure you speak really clearly into your microphone.
Okay, this is a process I've been going through since 1975, and I apologize if I said anything about a battle. It's not a battle, it's a process. And I welcome to be part of the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Charles Gibson?
From what I'm taking, that is the question, can we just narrow the focus? Are we at least okay on the side of the street where we are as a basic premise that, are we okay at least being there? I know I hear the commission on both sides saying that we should be across the street. We've given you our reasons why that's not practical, but just as a starting point, moving forward and how we approach it. I know, I think the consensus is we should go to HDC, see what they say and come back to your board. But is that a non-starter? Is the general consensus right now that you don't even want to see it on that lot? Just trying to narrow the discussion a little bit to see where we are.
Thank you. I think from my perspective, having all of the public safety individuals weigh in, I understand that this equipment, should be on the water side of the street. I think you guys have presented that pretty clearly. But I do agree with Joe. I think that the massing of the building seems quite large, given that wetland scenic views are in our purview. And I think that it probably would be better to go before the HDC, who might help you shift that architecture, and then come back to us where the building in size might reduce. And even if it's just a little bit, it's helpful for us for meeting our purview, again, to protect those wetland scenic views and ensure that that waterfront is open for everybody, which has kind of, been a mission of the town. Yes, Charles?
So is it appropriate that if we request that this get tabled and come back at a date in the future after we go to HDCs and leave this open? Is that possible to do?
Yeah, I think that's possible. We haven't received any public comment at this point. So if all of the commissioners get their questions out, it's totally up to you guys as the applicants if you would like to continue.
I think hearing the discussion, I think we'd go to HDC and then like to just come back and move forward with you after that.
Okay. Jeff?
Yeah, so we don't have the necessarily ability to table per se. We have to go to date certain, but we certainly could put it out. And then if they've gone to HDC, we can put it back on the agenda with those dates, or just kind of continue in some continuances forward. So we could do a continuance for 2 weeks or for 4 weeks, or I have to pull up the schedule to get beyond there. But as long as we put it to a date, we're happy to work with the applicant to get back if you guys feel that's the best path to go.
Yeah,
Jeff?
a month would be fine.
Looks like we have a few last minute questions, and then we'll do that. So Maureen?
And through the chair, Sheila, you had mentioned that you were concerned about that there was a thought of putting the whole facility on the other side of the street. I don't think any of us were saying that, unless I may be wrong, but I don't think any of us were saying that it was the emergency equipment that is at issue. You need to be able to see what's going on, and it's not where that building is. It's its size, and then is there something we can do about the emergency equipment? So I just wanted to clarify that. So because I think Charlie, you were kind of asking that question, and that's. But I personally think that we still have. I would still say the issue of the emergency equipment is still something to continue to be looked at. And I appreciate the chief mentioning that we have a bylaw prohibiting that kind of light. I know we don't want to have, traffic lights, red and green, but judicious use of lights for public safety purposes might be something that we may want to look at changing the bylaw for, especially looking forward and being more adaptable to, how everything is changing on island. So just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Mark?
I was just going to support Charlie's comment about a 1 month to our next meeting.
Yeah, thank you. So if there are no other questions, and again, it looks like there's no public comment. Jeff?
Yeah, just for clarity and a little bit of help, and again, we're happy from our end to help out. Are there any other issues or concerns if we're gonna put this off for a month that you would like to see addressed? I just want to make sure we're not missing anything. If the major concern was just the massing of the buildings, I just didn't want to make sure there was something that was missed, so we can try to hopefully move it along.
I know I haven't asked about this, but any crazy lighting that might be impacting the water, we obviously don't like that, but I haven't seen the lighting plan for this.
All right. I didn't think there was. I was just double checking to make sure that it was really just related to the kind of the massing of the structures.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeff.
So,
Ian?
Well, no, I appreciate you all being here, and it certainly changed my point of view about the emergency equipment and where it needs to be. So thank you for coming before us. And I just want to echo my fellow commissioners, hoping that the HDC might be able to persuade you to change the design a little bit too. And we understand about the height and the flood zones. We have this all the time. So anyway, thank you for your presentation.
Ian. Okay, so with that, would you guys like to continue for a month? And I believe that date would be July 23rd.
That is correct.
Okay, so this will continue until July 23rd. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna move back up on the list, and we're gonna go to Chuck Rowe Nominee Trust at 25 Quays Road, and this is represented by Art Gasparo and Stephen Cohen.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is our, I believe, third public hearing for this application, which had to do with the installation of a new steel sheet bulkhead in front of the failing timber bulkhead. And I won't rehash all the previous discussions, but to go over, we provided a revised plan and letter to you and essentially removed the extension that had been proposed along the easterly property line. There was a lot of discussion and comments and concern related to that. So we have eliminated that from the proposal and feel that the project now is the same length and configuration of the existing licensed structure, which had an order of conditions issued for it, given that it was timber, and that we want to go to steel. That is essentially the scope of the change in the 1 foot or so, or the thickness of the corrugated steel in front of the timber. We would expect to obtain a minor modification to our Chapter 91 license for the change from the timber to the steel, and I don't anticipate difficulty with that. We wanted to do the different project, but clearly there was extensive discussion and concerns about doing so. And at this point, the family is mostly concerned with the failure, or the starting to lose the structural integrity of the wood, which is starting to rot out, and how that could negatively impact both the protection of the property as well as the coastal resource areas. And we do think that doing, I won't go through all of the alternatives because we have spent so much time on them, but of course, happy to discuss any of them that you may wish. But that in doing the steel in front of the timber, we feel that it is the least impact to the protected interests than any of the other alternatives, because we wouldn't have to go and excavate out that timber that's there and the dead men and cause destabilization of the material that's behind there, as well as the bank itself. And with that, I'd be happy to address additional questions or comments or concerns you might have.
Thank you, Art. Jeff, do you have a question?
I don't have a question, but I wanted to provide some information to the commission. So you guys had asked last time about the status of the Chapter 91 license as it related to potentially change in environmental conditions. So we talked about it kind of internally a little bit, and I got directed to a gentleman who's Dave Hill, who works for Mass Waterways and has been working on this exact issue. And I ended up talking to him at pretty good length about how changing conditions relates to the applicability of Chapter 91 licenses and how Mass Waterways has been looking at Chapter 91 licenses. And kind of following our discussion, he related to me that he understands that environmental conditions change, even change from when the license was issued on a lot of different projects, but projects where in replacement is something that they've only required a minor modification to existing license for the material, essentially. He did say that anytime that bulkhead or that material change was going to cause essentially a move of the area. So if the bulkhead that was being proposed was moving out, 5 feet or 10 feet or to a different kind of historic area, that would require a new license. But in this, even if it was something where the high wall wasn't necessarily hitting the bulkhead issued, they have not been requiring new licenses to do this type of activity. So I wanted to pass that information along. It was really interesting to talk to Dave. I was hoping to maybe set up a time to have him talk to the commission about Chapter 91 licensing in general, because he was very, very helpful and very knowledgeable about. So I thought that through council to talk to that waterways. So it was really beneficial.
Thank you for that information, Jeff. That's very helpful.
Good.
Any comments or questions? It looks like Seth has his hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I address a question to Jeff, please?
Yes.
So, Jeff, was there any information in that conversation that would characterize what constitutes a move? Is it feet, inches, whatever? I mean, in this case, obviously, the new steel sheeting is not going to be going in the exact same place as the timber. It's going to be going close to, but slightly in front of where the timber is.
Right. So I'll try to clarify from what I had said. They don't consider what this is kind of an in-kind replacement. So you're talking about something that's kind of within close proximity to that wall. What they've seen that they require new licenses before are bulkheads being put back in like historic locations. So you're talking about moving out feet or to previously established water lines. He says something that they really start to get kind of curious when you kind of cross like a 5-foot threshold from where something was. But he said anything kind of within that first, 1 to 2 feet, something that if it's just that material change in that same location, they've only been requiring that minor modification. If the material is changing or there's substantial replacement of what was existing. So I think in this case, and we talked about this case specifically, that he felt that the minor modification would all be the only part required for the license as it relates to Chapter 91.
Thank you, Jeff. Ian?
Yes, so through you, Madam Chair, to Jeff, when we discussed the Hennigan property out in Nantucket and that the resource area had changed, and that was upheld by the court, I believe, when it was appealed after we denied the rebuilding. So at what point, for instance, now that the high tide is several feet up the bulkhead, when before it was below the bulkhead in its entirety, at what point would that not, why wouldn't that be considered a resource area change? And if Dave Hill said that it wouldn't, why not? I mean, has there been case law? Was that discussed? Or anyway, thank you.
Yeah, no. So we did talk about it specifically, and I think the major differentiation here, Ian, is, and I know what we talked about before, is the Hennigan property was applied through the Wetlands Protection Act specifically, and that wasn't necessarily a Chapter 91 case at that point. And when we talked about it, I think the folks at Mass Waterways have been allowing, even in these cases where beaches have eroded or the water line has moved up on these structures, as long as it's kind of an in-kind replacement, to still allow that lesser permitting threshold. And that's a decision that they've made through kind of a mixture of policy and regulation. But I will say that it is also something that they are looking at as it relates to sea level rise and climate change, and perhaps amending or working on those regulations and how that's reviewed going forward. But that's their current interpretation of their rules, is that this type of work is something that doesn't require new licensure.
Thank you.
Let me rephrase to put a caveat on that. As long as there's a existing valid license. If it's an unlicensed structure, all bets are off. But since it was licensed, they do allow these changes. If this was an unlicensed bulkhead, I think we'd be having an entirely different discussion.
Thank you, Jeff. Mark?
Through the chair to Art, Art, I'm very troubled by his application, primarily because on my site visit, I noticed that there's some serious erosion on end scouring on the east side, and it's starting to eat into the property owner's real estate. Even the upland is being undermined. Furthermore, you have 3 jetties already exist with very large rocks. They're probably helping to create the end scouring as well as the bulkhead. But my question to you, Art, is what is the useful life of the jetty? Of the bulkhead as it stands now? Would you guess? I mean, part of it is quite new. The timbers are still green, and ones that are above the water are still green. The eastern end looks a little older and starting to tip out a little bit. But what do you guess is a useful life?
Art, do you have a reply?
I don't know that I could give an estimate as to when you would have complete failure of that structure. I think that you're going to start to see it fail in segments. And as you note, there are portions of it, the worst sections are the areas that are subject to the wet dry cycle. And once we start to get sand leaching out of there, typically those kind of failures then start to accelerate fairly rapidly, with inundation up that along the face of a bulkhead, and then the sand essentially getting sucked out. And, the family is trying to plan ahead for, the cost and the project and going ahead to get this done in a proactive manner. It really doesn't make sense as we see it to wait for complete failure instead of responsibly maintaining the structure. And I also advise against starting a quilt patchwork type of repair, because then you're in a situation like this with the age of this, you're just going to be chasing it. You're going to have more activity down there. And it seems to me that in terms of protection of resource areas, the best way you could go about this is to come in and do it all once and as quickly as possible, to address the questions about it. It's not falling over yet, and it's not completely rotted out yet, but it is aging. And this is a very expensive major project. It wouldn't be proposed and being undertaken if it was something that they didn't feel, the family that's owned this property for a very long time didn't feel that they needed to do. And I agree with that. I don't think it's a good idea to start trying to patch it as certain areas rot out. And then if I could, to the question of, or to the point of end scour, I would say that I don't think that the remnants of the stone groins that are there are necessarily accelerating, erosion. Typically, they tend to help hold the beach. And I think end scour in this situation is quite limited due to the kind of wave environment that we're in. I think we discussed this in either the first or the second hearing. A lot of, what I think you see at the terminal end of such a long structure is that the natural bank has continued to erode at its natural rate over, say 30 plus years. And when you have one spot that is held fixed in comparison to another spot that is retreating, it becomes very evident, the erosion that's there. Now, that's not to say that there aren't any very localized, as I see it, impacts as a result of, water, interacting with the structure at the end. typically, end scour is a function of velocity and wave refraction that carries additional sediment away from the bank and the beach. And here we've got a couple of things where we have, a fairly cobbly, large particle size of the sediment. And then you also have limited wave velocities and dynamics that are happening because the size of the waves that can act on this are limited by the fetch across the harbor. Now, that's not to say in a northeast storm that there's never wave action at this spot, because it does happen, but it's also the magnitude of that, I think, is limited. To the bigger point, and I mean, just go on and on, but I think that was why we wanted to do the extension. I don't particularly, as an engineer, like leaving the bulkhead sort of ending the way that it is, but I felt like, in going through all of the alternatives and the discussions with the commission and what it would take to then go to the level of disturbance that would have to be done to install some other kind of extension there isn't warranted in terms of just trying to maintain a pre-existing license structure, which is their main goal.
Thank you, Art. Mark, did you have another question?
Oh, I have sort of a follow-up. I'm on, yeah. A follow-up. That I appreciate the landowners are looking to the future, but I think we should be looking to the future also, Art, because we've seen some ridiculous looking peninsulas on the south shore of Nantucket, and this is starting to look like, at least on the east end, a peninsula that's beginning, and I just wonder where it'll end. It's troubling. I don't see an easy answer. The return, the new Chapter 91 license might have helped slow it down or even stop it from, well, slow it down anyway. But I don't know where to go with this one, Art.
Thank you, Mark. Ian?
Well, I feel very much the way Mark does. And, I was never satisfactorily convinced that they couldn't move the house back, because when you actually go out there and have a look, what is shown on a structure as a structure is really a glorified shed. And also, I wondered how accurate the survey was, because it really, as far as I know, Art can correct me if I'm wrong, it hasn't been accurately surveyed for decades, if ever. And this is probably a tangential question for Jeff. If we're saying that the house can be moved back, then is the Chapter 91 license moot? Because then its purpose is no longer valid. So we're sort of wrestling with the legacy of the previous era when many of these dilemmas were not an issue. So I think Mark's put it very well. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. And Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I couldn't agree more about wrestling with the legacy of the past. I applaud the applicant's representative for removing the extension here, the return, because as I've noted in the past, think that would constitute a new additional structure. I was just wondering, I read the revised submission, and the representative claims that it's no longer possible to provide a pedestrian easement without that return. I had suggested that instead of that return, they potentially consider some type of other softer installation or living shoreline, keep that pedestrian access and have it go, I would say, south of whatever that installation is. So I was wondering if they could discuss whether that may or may not be possible to to do both things we're trying to achieve here.
Thank you, Seth. Art, do you have a reply?
Yes. If I could first to Mr. Golding, in terms of the survey, we surveyed the current conditions to prepare the plan. So the bank, the bulkhead, the elevations, the area of the topography that's shown on there, the property lines, those are all based on 2018 and 19 surveys. The structures on the south end of the property, again, we were focusing our scope, our approximate, if that's what you were referring to, just solely because we were focusing the application and the scope of work on the coastal areas. But everything for the coastal and conditions of the property line and topography, all of that is current. So I'm not sure if there's, when you say it hasn't been surveyed in decades, I'm a little confused, but I hope that addressed that.
Thank you, Art. But I was referring to the original plot plan showed that in the southwest corner that the actual survey point, it said it was approximate, I thought. So I'm not, so I didn't realize you surveyed the entire lot.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so thank you. And I didn't realize, so the aspect of public access has been formally withdrawn?
That's correct.
Okay, then I cannot vote for this project. So that's simple.
And then if I may, to Mr. Engelborg's comments, we again looked at the eastern end and trying alternatives that would be, perhaps reinforced fiber rolls, living shoreline, again, some of the same alternatives analysis in order to fit that into that area on the property and not into the Quays Road layout. There would be extensive excavation that would be required in order to do that installation. When you set any kind of, like the base of any of those kind of installations, you've got to be down at a lower elevation and then work back up. And we're up against the Quays Road layout there. So in order to do this, I'm not saying that it's impossible, but I think that when you are considering alternatives for that installation, you have to consider the disturbance that would be required in order to do that. And we can agree to disagree, but that's where we came down on that, is that to come in there and try to do that sort of work would be so much more disruptive to that whole area than trying to leave what's there alone, if you will, some of the rocks, some of the erosion, some of the slumping that's happening. And by just driving the steel in front of the, what's there, we can, sort of be in and out of there with the, much less disturbance. The aspect of becoming a peninsula, I think, is simply a given of coastal erosion and processes. In other words, that's this is 1,000-foot long armored shoreline, and at this spot where it does stop, there's nothing that we're going to do short of the discussion that's happened that would be to rip out and relocate or disturb all of that bank that's there. And I think if we were talking about obviously new construction, if we were talking about non-pre-78 houses, those are all things that would be expected of the applicant. But I think in this case, where they're trying to keep this thing from falling in, and it's not just the rot, as I had said earlier, as we talked about it. It's as Mr. Beal referenced, I don't know if some of the steel tieback rods have snapped, I suspect maybe they have on the east side, but you're starting to get a cantering out of the top of that, bulkhead. And so, it would just be could just be a big storm that ultimately, starts to take out pieces of that, which isn't what we would obviously want to have happen. And so I understand the position of the commission and that there, may not be complete agreement on this, though, from the applicant's perspective, I think that we've, met the performance standards and are compliant with the requirements of, having a license that says that you need to maintain your structure.
Madam Chair, this is Stephen Cohen. I don't get my video on.
I know, Steve, can you just hold on a second because Joe had a comment first.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So I agree with Art. I think that all the licenses are in place. They do have to maintain this. I think what they've come forward is a reasonable plan to protect their property. I understand what Seth is saying. I am kind of upset that we lost that easement. I think it's an important piece to this puzzle. But I also understand that the waivers he would have to get for seeking along that easterly lot line. So we're fighting a balance here, but I think that Art has checked all the boxes, and the chapter number 1 is fine. It's not an expansion. It's just, he's trying to not have a wall fall over and cause damage, or, having timbers floating around the harbor during some storm. And I think he's being proactive. He's noticed that there's some parts of the wall that are starting to lean and tip. And he's saying, we need to get ahead of this before it becomes a problem. So I really don't see a problem with this project. He's done everything that the law and our bylaws permit. So thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Steve, to you.
Yeah, so I'm sorry that for some reason the video is not working on my end, but I think actually Joe somewhat made my point, but I'll say anyway. I think that the issues that are being raised here, to some extent, are beyond the scope of the request. In other words, preventing a peninsula, while desirable, is not really one of the performance standards. Or we'd rather you move the house back is not really a performance, is not the question here. We have to take this not as a clean application for a post-78 house, but a pre-78 house that also already has a valid Chapter 91 license for this. And if we look at those questions, we've met those performance standards. And I hope that the commission will answer the questions in front of it, not the questions that it would prefer to have. The walkway and whether or not we can do a softer extension is something we will definitely consider. We definitely are going to have to come back with some kind of extension, and we're hoping to have, something that the commission would find more desirable than a steel bulkhead when we're able to do that. But at this point, replacement of the bulkhead in its existing location with a better result is something that is clearly provided for in the law, and we've laid that out in our filings. And when staff checked with DEP, they confirmed that. So I would hope that the commission will approve the replacement of the existing license structure, and hopefully we can work with the staff and the commission on an extension that is more desirable, but not currently being proposed. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Dave, did you have a comment? And then I'll go to Maureen.
No, it's been covered. Art, I think Art's done a good job. He's, as Joe said, he's got all the boxes checked. I think, given the fact that they have an existing license, they have the right to maintain this. From experience, I've driven thousands of feet of bulkheads. The proper way to do this is what they're doing, to go in front of it very short distance. The work required to remove the existing bulkhead and place a new one in that same location is extreme. It's in the new technology with a cantilevered bulkhead, that's not required. And Arthur is right. I think the tiebacks have failed in that section, and it's one, maybe one good storm away of being catastrophic.
Thank you, Dave. Maureen?
This, obviously we all have struggled with this. But I've really been thinking about the fact that it is a pre-1978 structure. And, you know, this isn't the situation any of us would want. And Steve, I think you mentioned if, you know, this were a post-1978 structure, this would be a completely different conversation about what to do. So, because I think our choices are essentially do what is proposed, which is replacing a failing / about to fail wooden bulkhead with a steel bulkhead that will be immediately in front of the old one. So that's not going to be a Chapter 91 concern. And then we're left with the issues of the scour and the rest of it. And because I just think that you know, we all are kind of stuck with the fact that this is in a special position because it's pre-78, and that while it would be great if they came in with, we're going to move the house and we're going to put a living shoreline in, that I really, as much as I would prefer that being what's before us, I'm just not sure that that is the right thing to do at this point in time. However, the fact that what Steve was just mentioning, that they want to get to fixing this, because then next step would be to work on, for want of a better word, an extension that would help with the scouring issues and maybe also with the access issues. I'm not positive about that. I'm wondering if that could be made a condition of allowing this first step to happen. I'm just trying to think of you know, trying to be creative with people who have a house that has the right to protect it. You know, they have the right to hard arming, which is not something I love at all, but they have that. And I'm just trying to think of how we can, you know, balance the damage to the resource area with, you know, the fact that we have a legal constraint for this property that we don't have on many others. Thanks.
So I think it'll go Mark, Ian, and Seth, but first I just want to comment because I haven't weighed in today. I know that my track record, and I feel like it's an unfortunate track record, but it's mine. I have, you know, previously voted for in-kind replacement of bulkheads for pre-78 houses. And I think the positive that has come out of all of these hearings is that we are now discussing relevant living shorelines and better environmental alternatives for things like extensions or, you know, bulkheads that have completely failed and lost their licensing. And I think that it is, you know, completely true that the applicant will have to come back and deal with the eastern side that has so much end scour going on, or it would be fruitless to replace the bulkhead anyway, because it, you know, allowing that scour just would destroy the bulkhead. So I think what I'm saying in a very long-winded way is, you know, I probably will vote to allow them to replace the bulkhead in kind. And I think, you know, in the future, we should look at our regulations as far as kind of allowing for more living shoreline discussion. Because I see this as being very positive for the commission, everything we've talked about. Mark, I think it was going to go to you, and then Seth and Ian.
Yeah,
I cede to my senior committee members.
I can vote in favor of this application with the stipulation that they meet the Chapter 91 requirement of public access. And right now they don't, because the high tide laps up against the bulkhead. And we have to provide a usable, and I use the word usable because what's on the shore side of the bulkhead right now is a zoo, a wild area. I'm not sure how they can solve that problem. Maybe finish off the top of the new bulkhead so it's walkable for our fishing and clamming and fowling friends. But I think replacing it probably is a proper thing for us to do. But I'm troubled by the lack of public access. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I think Seth and then Ian.
It was Ian first.
Oh, so Ian, sorry.
I'm having my knuckles wrapped. You're such a tough chairwoman, Ashley. So yes, I absolutely mirror what Mark is saying. So they're not providing the access. So that's a good reason to deny it. Another one is to read from our own performance standards. No new bulkheads or coastal engineering structures should be permitted to protect structures constructed or substantially improved after 878. Bulkheads may be rebuilt only if the commission determines there is no environmentally better way to control an erosion problem, including in appropriate cases, the moving of the threatened building, et cetera, et cetera. There has been nothing, that building can be moved, period. And so with the applicants showing a clear inability to compromise on the Chapter 91 requirement and on our own bylaws, I would urge my fellow commissioners to deny it and go to the mat on this. It's overdue to go to the mat on anyway.
Thank you, Ian. Seth?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ian beat me to it, although I think he read the performance standard for Coastal Beach. In Coastal Bay, it says no new bulkheads, coastal revetments, groins, or other coastal engineering structures. I've raised that point in the past. Shall be permitted to protect structures constructed or substantially improved after 878, except for public infrastructures. Bulkheads and groins may only be rebuilt, as he said, if there's an environmentally better way, including moving of the building. And that was not considered here. I'm not going to go and rehash my whole point about living shorelines. I think it's applicable. I would definitely like to see, when we do our regulatory update, I would definitely like to see this wording strengthened to require considering moving the building and requiring considering a living shoreline before a redevelopment of the bulkhead, but that's not what our regulation says right now. So in this case, and given the permitting history, I'm not going to say any more. I do think that I have one question for Art, if I may.
Yep.
I think I read the revised submission regarding why the pedestrian easement is not maybe feasible without the extension. You say here that it's logistically challenging and it might create additional damage, but I was just wondering if you could maybe expound on that a little bit and explain why we couldn't do that a little bit more, if you may. So have the bulkhead permitted with no extension and still have the easement.
Art, do you have a reply?
I do. The concern is that the access from the beach to the easement would be exactly in the area that we've discussed as being a concern for NSCOUR. You would have to, there'd have to be, how do you get to this easement? So if it was to simply follow the bulkhead, and perhaps we could put the plan on the screen. If we could, I could either share mine if you want, or I don't know if you prefer that staff. Yeah, Joe has it.
Got it. She's a pro.
I know. I just didn't want to. Oh, that's our next one. But I'll just continue to talk a little bit. So you would have to, basically climb up those rocks or behind the rocks you can see there's elevations there that are down around elevation 3 on the right-hand side. And they go up to about, elevation 6 or so. So it's not a huge rise, but it's enough that, as I think you well know from areas where we have all these signs about keep off the dunes, and that's, if you start having pedestrian traffic, and that's right where the concern that you're already getting scour is, our concern is that, you know, it would be made worse there. And then if you were to try to, the other way to look at this, if you were to try to have your easement come from the Quays Road parking lot, where I show the gravel parking lot, you're going to have to come down from elevation 13 or so down to 6, the same, like the 7 feet, the same area that the owners currently have a set of stairs on. So then you'd have to be talking about putting in some additional structures to get down that coastal bank. So as you can see, all of those things get more, you know, not impossible, but more complicated and have concerns and also additional potential impacts. So that's where we weighed out that, you know, if we had an extension that would essentially have held up that bank, where you could then come down, and even that I don't think was perfect. I really think that also, you know, would have required some kind of path, or, you know, it wouldn't have been perfect to get from the top down along there, but at least with a bulkhead perhaps sloped going up there, we could have made something work. And, you know, if we start getting into stairs or additional structures, you know, which way do you come at it? And then how much of an easement, you know, how far down the easement does down the property line does that have to go? We feel like it really expands the scope of what was an application to, or has an application that's been reduced to simply maintain a structure that's failing, that had a permit and had a license. And that's really how, you know, how they feel about that. The one thing I'd like to, and Stephen might want to expand on this, just address what's been said in terms of Chapter 91 and, you know, access. Chapter 91 access is within the intertidal zone. So we have this situation, obviously, that's been referred to, where the high water is up on the bank, but during some tides, you could still, you know, pass on that beach. Typically when we do a Chapter 91 waterways license application, and you have a structure which crosses the intertidal zone, and then they have you put in some, you know, stairs that go up and over you know, a dock or something like that. I think this is a little bit different, just because the license was already there, and you still have some, you know, you would be then granting rights outside of the intertidal zone, which is where the Chapter 91 jurisdiction is. And, you know, with that, I'm probably going into more of Stephen's territory, but that would be.
So just to piggyback what Art was saying, he's right that what was suggested about requirement to provide public access is somewhat backwards. It's really that you're not blocking public access. And, you know, the example that Art gave of a dock that blocks public access, that you have to have a way, you know, over it or across it, is really a good example. And the other one, and I think Jeff would be familiar with the file, was, you know, there was this exact issue came up, I think, on Orange Street, with whether or not it was a legal requirement. It was okay to just tell people that they could go around it by going up to the public way. And the DEP determined that asking people to just go around the property to connect to public ways was sufficient, because you weren't blocking it too much. And I think in this case, people could easily go up the public way and walk around and then come back to the land bank land if they wanted to. And so I don't think that there's any interference with the public access, certainly not any more than exists today. Again, we're talking about a bulkhead inches away from an existing bulkhead, where the public access in the intertidal zone is not being blocked by the structure. So again, I think we are entirely compliant with both the local and state law here. And, you know, it's not what we all wish we could do. It's what's compliant with the law and what's the best option. And I think this is both compliant and the best option. And again, in terms of adding more of a public path, I think that's something we would bring up when we come back with an extension, which we're going to need to do to protect the property. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Ian, you had a comment or question?
Well, I do. I respectfully disagree with both Art and Steve, so nothing's new, I guess. And, you know, if you, if the bulkhead had never been put there right now, the high tide would be practically lapping up against the building when you look at the aerials. And I guess the owners can, I don't know if I can be sued for trespass retroactively, but there are plenty of times when I've hopped up on the stones after walking down the path to walk across and enjoy the view when I can't walk on the beach because it's because the tide has been too high. So, and there we have it. So I would ask my fellow commissioners under these circumstances to deny it unless we can have a compromise about public access. Because at the moment, I mean, there's, you know, even in my advanced age, as you know, I find absolutely no difficulty in hopping up there and enjoying the winter there. And I do it fairly frequently. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. Joe?
I understand, Ian. I respectfully disagree. I feel like you could have the same problem. You could be, Easton Street would be gone. Hulbert Ave would be gone. Town would be wiped out. I mean, there's a lot of things that we have in place that have protected this. Our entire town could be underwater. And I think that these are things we need to be concerned about. And I understand it's a 6-foot-high wall, but at the same time, it's not that the property did anything different or changed. It's the sea level has risen. And the people are just trying to maintain the wall. I think if we're going to say like you can't maintain a wall or you have to bring some, I think the entire town, all of, you know, Wall Street, etc., all that area, which is probably what 3 to 4 feet of elevation, is going to change quite dramatically, and Nantucket is going to change quickly if these walls are not maintained. And I think that this is going to be really problematic. And I don't understand. We're talking about the same harbor. If you say that town's any different than this person on Quays, etc., you're going down the line. I think they're all in the same vein, have to be looked at. If you don't allow this one, there's an inconsistency. Do I have a problem with not having that path along the bulkhead? Yeah, but there's, like Art saying, there is a way and times you can go by. And maybe when he comes back for the second application, you could say, hey, we're going to put this easement because of this. But right now, that is a problem that I have, is that the easement is gone. But I also think that the wall can be maintained and replaced and repaired accordingly by all our standards. So that's, thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, Joe. So Ian
May I
and
reply, Madam Chair?
Sorry, what Ian?
May I reply?
Yes.
So Joe, I think the one area where we disagree in this is that I feel it's not an absolute rule that here outside of town, we're trying to protect beach access. In town, it's an entirely different ball of wax. You're protecting public infrastructure, or there's no beach access to protect. And so I don't feel that one is setting a precedence that then should be used in that situation. So unlike you, where you feel, I guess, that it should be one size fits all, I feel that it really depends on where the question is coming up. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ian. So Mark and then Maureen. Oh, you're muted.
No, I agree that getting to it will be a problem, but if you think of the Children's Beach area and the White Elephant, right at the launching ramp, there's a wooden walkway in front of the White Elephant and the big sign that says public access. And that's what I'm suggesting we have on top of this bulkhead, because right now, I think that it doesn't meet Chapter 91. I think it does require public access between the high and low tide, and that doesn't mean walking in the water. So I think it's doable. The problem where it's end scouring will be a problem that can be solved. It might not be an easy one, but it's going to be the landowner's problem. But I think I'm for the project, but it's got to have public access. That's what we're doing on all of our beaches and the whole island is one beach, one island. And let's keep that ball in our mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So Maureen, and then to Joe, and then Jeff.
Thanks, Madam Chair. I am wondering if there's a compromise that we might come up with that would be amenable. And there seems to be, I think we're thinking about kind of it's been mentioned, kind of a two-step plan. One is to replace the existing bulkhead because it's, it's in terrible shape and it needs to be maintained per Chapter 91. And then that's kind of step one. And then if we could, and Jeff, I would want to hear your view on this. If we could put in a condition that, okay, you shore up this bulkhead first, and then you develop a way to provide public access. I may not be saying that right at all, but that we tie our approval for the bulkhead repair to a subsequent creation, maintaining of the access. And we live without access for a while they do the repair. I don't know if people think that makes any sense or even if it's doable to do that condition. So Jeff, is that something we could do you think, or?
Jeff, do you have a reply or an idea?
I mean, just thinking about it for a second. I mean, I think what I'm hearing a lot is we're to enforce the requirements of Chapter 91, the Wetlands Protection Act, which I think Chapter 91 will impose whatever conditions they feel necessary to be compliant with Chapter 91. That's within their purview. I mean, having reviewed that license for what exists, when they issued that license originally, a pretty significant portion of the mean high water line fell against the bulk was being considered. For, I would say, just looking at the plan, probably better than half of the property. It kind of came in, back out. So it could have been something that was contemplated when they originally issued that license. But I do think that we should really try to stay focused to the interest that we're trying to protect and not apply someone else's regulation that is their job to apply. I mean, I think I appreciate the public access and kind of personally agree that we should maximize public access whenever possible. But I'm not sure, I mean, even looking at it through a recreational lens here, I'll have to double check that the recreation is the interest that's applicable in this. Even looking at that, if, they have a license through that process, that's separate. If there's a way that you're in the recreational interests of the public to use the resource area and replacing the bulkhead not already being impacted in that way, I mean, I think you'd have to have a pretty discussion on why you're in this case one applied it previously. And trust me, I'm with the whole just because we've done it wrong before isn't make it right now. And we talked about a lot of that last night. But just in the last 6 months, I mean, there have been growing applications up where that requirement hasn't necessarily been part of that. Number of heads along Holbert Ave. In this case, looking at the structure cumulatively for recreation, I mean, you have to probably take into account that it's attached to a 800 plus feet of harboring and recreational opportunities that are in that area. I think denying the project for that main interest, I think could be long-term problematic as far as any sort of appeal goes. This is, again, opinion, but you would certainly need to have a really sound reason and discussion with impacts and very clear limits to make work and to make a decision on that. And I think that could be tough to get to.
Thank you, Jeff.
Madam Chair,
Uh,
it's
yeah, Steve, Joe had a comment first and then Ian.
Sure.
and you.
sure. Thank you.
So Joe,
No, I'll defer to Ian.
okay.
Well, please, I hope that becomes a habit. Sorry. So, but I'm a bit, perhaps I misunderstood Jeff, but if the aerials are, from 75 are absolutely clear, it's a straight line. And so, the tide did not come up to that bulkhead when that original Chapter 91 was, well, I'll stake a good meal to everybody on the committee if they can prove that the tide did come up to the bulkhead when it was initially built. Thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Joe.
I'm all set. I'll wave.
So Steve and then Jeff.
Sure. Just procedurally, I want to remind the commission that in addition to your permit, this requires filing what we think is a minor modification with the DEP for the Chapter 91 to update them on the alteration. And if DEP determines that we don't qualify under their regulations, then they would say, no, you have to file for an amendment to the permit. Or if they wanted to impose conditions on it consistent with their own regulations, they would do that. So I would encourage you to let Chapter 91 regulating to DEP, which has not only the authority to, but will be part of this process. It's just the next step.
Thank you, Steve. Jeff.
Yeah, I don't want to go into a back and forth, but I just based my analysis on Chapter 91 license looking at plan that was filed and approved in 1982, where the high water line is clearly labeled along a portion of the bowl. I agree. The 75 aerials look different when that license was 82 and signed off by the DEP. That was the condition that was represented in a plan. I unfortunately was 4 years old in 82 and not able to witness that in person. So I'm really just relying on the stamp surveyed plan. So again, that's what that analysis was kind of based on.
I won't bring up your age against you, Jeff.
It's all right.
All right. Seth.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a few quick things. I've most said my piece, but I do think that we should be independent of the decision on this current application. We should be continuing to enforce our regulations moving forward, that we need to consider environmentally friendly, more friendly alternatives when bulkheads, revetments, or groins come in, even if in the permitting history we haven't done that in the past. I've only been on this commission for a year. I think there's been two out of those four I've raised this issue, and 2 out of those 4 I honestly didn't. It was before I kind of delved into this regulation a little bit more and knew about the specific requirement. So I'm partially responsible for this permitting history too. I will own that. But I think that we need to enforce that going forward, no matter where it is. If it's out of town, in town. I appreciate Joe's comment about saying, yeah, a lot of things are going to change. Some of those changes are probably coming no matter what. And we can do one of two things. We can try to continue to use the same strategies that we've done in the past that in the future may not be successful at dealing with sea level rise. Or we can try to put into place living shorelines that are better in terms of dealing with coastal erosion and protecting structures at the same time. If 40 or 50 years ago, all these properties, or hundreds of years ago, and some of them had put in living shorelines instead of coastal bulkheads, we probably wouldn't be having this issue right now. We would have been able to maintain both the natural processes that the commission protects and those structures at the same place. I will say, I wasn't alive when probably any of these structures were permitted, but I think that, we are dealing with past potentially bad installation methods and installation protocols in the past. And in an ideal world, if we could go back and change it, I think that would be great. We can't do that, but I think we should still look to the future and think about how we can make the next generation of coastal engineering processes be more sensitive to the environment while still protecting the houses and structures and all the resources that are afforded public protection. I don't have any qualms with the legality of the Chapter 91 license or the replacement or anything like that. I just think that those environmentally friendly solutions need to be considered. And I still would like them to be considered more in this case, but if not in this case, in the future, we should be considering that every single time. Thank you.
Thank you, Seth. That was well said, and I hope that all these projects in the future get this level of scrutiny and looking at living shorelines and more environmentally friendly methods. I think that's really important moving forward. Maureen?
I'm wondering if it's time to call a question and see if we're at a decision time.
Okay, yep, there's no public comment on this at this point, so. Art, do you have something to say?
I would just say, Madam Chair, I think we have gone, over this and presented our, position, and I think we would just like to close the hearing. Things seem to be kind of going around a little at this point.
Okay. Thank you, Art. So with that, is there a motion to close? I think that was motioned by Joe and seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal? Oh, I think you're muted.
Aye.
Engelborg?
Opposed.
Arisman, aye. Golding?
Can you clarify, this is a motion to close or approve?
This is a motion to close the hearing, and then we would have to go through orders of conditions and all that.
Thank you. So sure.
Okay. Lessor?
Sure, is that a yes or a no?
Yes, a yes.
Aye.
What do you want Terry to do with that?
So Phillips?
Aye.
All right, Topham?
Aye.
All right, so that closes with Commissioner Engelborg opposed. Thank you, Art and Steve, for representing that one.
Thank you.
So we are moving on in the agenda to Croquet Pitch LLC at 24 Westchester Street, and this is represented by Art Gasparo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this is the second public hearing for the application for some work on a existing residential site. And we provided a updated site plan and some additional information for the commission. And as you may recall, this property just outside of town, or borderline town, Westchester Street, has an existing single family dwelling, some improvements, and a few wetlands around, which are shown in blue on the plan. We filed a revised plan, which we had discussed a portion of which at the first hearing, but I'll just go over it. We moved the temporary dewatering area from the east side to the west side of the property. We added actually two pieces of silt fence now along the west side of the property, one along the existing edge of lawn and another along the existing edge of driveway. And then we created a proposed rain garden along the southwest corner of the property, essentially a vegetated swale that we would run the downspouts to. And that's all within existing lawn area. So that lawn would be removed and replaced with beneficial native species. We further added a restoration area on the east side of the property, which it doesn't show up as well as I would like, but I was trying to use a different line type, and I kind of ran out of colors. But it's shown as the dots where the word lawn is along the black dash line for the silt fence. And we would take out about 350 square feet of lawn there and replace that also with native species. And we've provided a copy of the document that I'm sure you're all familiar with, landscaping with native plants, that was put out by the Biodiversity Initiative, and the plants that would be used in both of these areas would be selected from that list. We further changed the project. There was, as you can see, the proposed structural elements are in green on the plan, and they're all outside of the 50-foot buffer zone. And the architects did a really good job, I think, in understanding and respecting that the 50-foot setback with the commission is a no structure zone, and have kept all of those structural elements outside of the 50. You may recall on the west side of the existing second dwelling, there is a covered porch that we had proposed to convert to interior living space. Whether or not that we needed a waiver or not, I think is a debate in of itself. But to avoid that altogether and avoid having what could be considered new structure within the 50-foot setback, the owner has agreed to remove that from the plans. So there's now no structural work within the 50-foot buffer zone. Further, the dewatering area, we really, I don't think it's going to be needed, as I explained at the first meeting, and as shown on the details. We've gone with a very specific engineered foundation type where the footing would be just about a foot below grade, and it would be on a couple feet of gravel. So we would scoop out the dirt, put it into a dump truck, and haul it away, and then immediately have a pile of gravel that we put back into that trench. And this is only going to be 3 feet deep, so we're not talking about a swimming pool type excavation. And in doing so, typically dewatering is needed when you're trying to pour concrete and lower groundwater levels. And we don't anticipate that would happen. Just in case, should there be stormwater during the anything that happens, we thought that it would be prudent to provide an area that if some temporary dewatering was needed, where that could go. The addition and the proposed porches would have gutters and downspouts, as we said, and that would run. Those would lead to the proposed rain garden. The other thing that had come up during the hearing was just a general feeling that the site was very developed and dense. And what I wanted to address in my letter and just kind of review with the commission is, in fact, the overall size of this site. While the work is, or the developed portion of the property is, rather condensed to one particular area, it's actually quite a large property, with only a portion of it developed, and all of the rest of it is essentially open space. And I did that calculation for you in the letter, where we're dealing with a 48,000 plus square foot lot. And then I did, just so that there was, the areas shown on the structure on the plan are what would be considered ground cover, essentially under zoning. So it shows to the foundation. But understanding that that's not the same definition that the commission cares about in terms of how structures are defined within the wetland regulations, I did additional calculations that incorporated the pool and the deck, and included in my letter that I came up with about 7,820 square feet of area that would meet the definition of your regulations for structure. And again, as you compare that to the 48,000 square foot site, it's about 16%. And that 7,800 square feet includes the proposed additions, just to be clear. So, we think that the overall project meets the performance standards, has been designed in such a way to not have an adverse effect, respects the 50-foot setback, is within existing landscaped, manicured, or shell driveway areas, all of it. So again, and I think when you look at the wetland resource areas and the setting and consider the protected interests, these additions are not going to have a negative impact. And I'd be happy to try to address questions or concerns you might have about the project.
Thank you, Art. Jeff?
Yeah, real quickly, you guys have asked for me to look in the permit history for.
Jeff, your mic seems to be really fuzzy.
Really? Any better?
No.
Perhaps he's talking with his mouth full.
I wish. Any luck?
No.
Oh.
All right, let me hop out. I'll try to log back in. So whoever wanted to go first, then I'll come back in.
Okay.
Madam Chair, maybe I could try to fill in a piece of that because there actually was a little more information in my supplemental. Again, I tried to provide as much information as I could to the commission. So I did include a 1971 aerial that I purchased, which showed, a portion of the house that was back there, extensive cleared areas, that around there. And then I went to, a 2003 aerial, which you can see there's actually, not a lot of change, I think, in terms of the driveway is the same, the main portions of the structures, the pool, and that was all in 2003. And then we show in 2019, there are some decks that are behind the house, but I think in general there's not a major expansion of the limits of work and disturbance on this property. And when I did check the files, well, thank you very much to Joe and Jeff, because I can't check the files anymore. But for checking the files, I think what Jeff was going to get to was that all that they had, and I didn't find any orders recorded at their registry of deeds, and the reason for that was that all that they had was a request for determination, of applicability for some landscaping on this property.
Thank you, Art. Any questions from commissioners? So I have a question, and it's honestly probably better suited for Jeff. But because the lawn in some spots essentially goes right up to the wetland, I am just wondering where this property is with soil testing and like recording fertilizer that they're putting on the lawn because of the proximity to these wetlands. I feel like this is a site that, should be submitting soil samples and then again, all of their fertilizer records.
If I may, I'm not aware of that having been done, but certainly if that was a condition of a new order, then the applicant would have to comply with that.
All right, thank you, Art. Any other, Maureen?
I just want to say that one of our concerns had been this is kind of squashed into there and the wetlands are bordering it so closely. So I think just the simple fact of having the soil testing and fertilizer kind of makes me feel more comfortable with all that's there, because it's those borders, obviously, where the most direct impact could happen. So if that's being managed properly, I think that's important, especially for this site. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Seth?
Yeah, I mean, I appreciate both those things. I think that also, especially in the areas that are within the 25-foot buffer zones that are currently lawn, I know they're historically lawn, but we may be able to condition that no fertilizer is used in those areas. So it's a possibility.
Yes, thank you, Seth. I think, honestly, once soil tests are submitted, they'll probably say that fertilizer isn't necessary in a lot of cases. At least, I'm sure it would be phosphate free that they'd be required to use. Any other thoughts on this project from commissioners? Okay. Jeff is not on, but Joe, do you know, do we have everything to close?
Yes, we do everything.
Okay. And it doesn't look like any members of the public have been following along or have weighed in on this one. So since we have everything, oh, Mark, do you have a comment or question?
Motion to close.
Joe?
Second.
Okay. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that closes unanimously.
Thank
Thank you, Mark. Jeff,
Is that better audio wise?
that is better.
All right, I hate to do this, and Paul, you got to promise you're not going to get really mad at me, right? What I'm about to say. But if we could, I was just going to make a suggestion. We have something on the agenda way down where we're talking about the Licensure Road enforcement that we had with Mr. Johnson and Sarah Alger and that whole group. I was only going to recommend that we might be able to move that because Sarah has to go moderate town meeting in like an hour, and I don't want her to get jammed up or have to drop off to go moderate town meeting. Not to put Paul or off, but
No,
I know
I'm
Sarah
fine
asked-
with that. Take care of Sarah. I can.
Yeah,
I'll
I just don't want to make I don't want to make the elected town moderator late to town meeting.
don't want to make Sarah late. That's fine. Go ahead. That's great.
As long
I'll
as
talk-
no one is opposed.
I think we're good with that. We need.
That's like the worst person to make angry ever is the moderator. So if Mr. Johnson and Mr. Paulson are listening, if you guys could start your phone and video, that would be a good time.
Okay, so we're moving on and skipping a few to other business to look at Town of Nantucket, Licensure Road, and then we'll go back. So Jeff, who would you recommend starting to explain this one? Would you like to recap or?
Let me just make sure I can get the other two folks who are involved on here. Charlie and Bill, are you two both there? Because they are the one. Hello, Mr. Johnson, are you there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
And we're just getting started, it's running up against time for a town meeting.
Yep, I heard.
And as one of the participants is the town moderator, I'm going to jump to the agenda. So I messaged Mr. Paulson as well, and he hasn't responded yet. So hopefully he's still there because I know he's here on behalf of the Quidnitz Quamasos, I believe. So just to kind of recap to everybody, I know differing of opinions on this, but just to kind of catch up where we were when we left off from the last meeting. This is a project that was kind of on two separate properties. There was a piece of private land owned by Mr. Shook, who Ms. Alger represents. And then there's the town-owned piece of land that's kind of the extension of Licensure Road layout that kind of runs down the coastal bank and towards the beach. This commission, a few years ago, I believe in 2017 off the top of my head, I didn't pull the folder out, permitted an invasive species removal project and kind of a bank restoration project. That work took place. And I know we sent around some photos and things that we had gotten from Seth Wilkinson, who did that work, and some replanting that had gone on. Recently, some of that area had been disturbed without benefit of permit. And that was something that Mr. Johnson had kindly come forward and said that he was responsible for that work. So we had sent him an enforcement action. We've met with the Johnsons out in the field to kind of go over a little bit, but that's kind of where we had left off. And at the same time, we had also on extending that order of conditions to put the previously permitted conditions on the Wilkinson plan from 2017 back into place. So hopefully this is up from our last meeting. I know we usually like to hear from the parties involved. So I can turn that to you, Madam Chair, and you can decide where to go from there.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. I know Sarah kind of explained her perspective last time. So I think it might be good to go to Charlie Johnson and hear what he actually did on that site.
I'm not on the video. I don't know if you care.
I mean, we've had others sign in without video before, so.
No, you're not allowing my video to go on. That's what it says. I don't.
So we can check with that.
It doesn't really matter, but. Oh, okay. There we go. Okay, Madam Chair, members of the commission, and Mr. Carlson, I'd like to begin with by reading an email I sent Jeff Carlson almost exactly a week ago. It summarized what I've done on the site. I'd also like to explain there's really a third parcel of land that we're talking about. It's within the street right of way, and it's an area that I cleared within the street right of way and placed the bench, and it's outside of the work area that is the proposed work area for Mr. Schutz's property, and the town property. So I'm reading an email to Jeff Carlson, Thursday, June 18th, 2020. Hi, Jeff. I've done something out in Quidnet, which probably will come to your attention soon. At the corner of Licensure Road near the pond is a strip of town-owned land that runs to the pond and which over the years has become a dumping ground. This last winter, parentheses, I lived just up the road at 8 Licensure Road. I began to clear out a lot of junk, including rebar, cinder blocks, electrical wiring, and boxes. The land used to be kept by Alan Norcross Jr. back in the 70s and was a place where walkers and bikers rested. There was a sweeping view of the pond, Sankaty, the cut, and the dunes, which was available to everyone. Before Bruce Poor redid the pond cottage, which is to the east of the town-owned land, there were no trees or any other vegetation, and was mowed grass up to the top of the bluff. Fence lines showed the limits of the strip. It had become overgrown with brush and invasive species. When the virus hit, I was sent home from work and had 2 weeks where I was getting paid by the town to stay home. I thought that this would be a good time to give back to the community and began to pull the brush, Japanese knotweed, and bamboo plants out, cleared the spot, planted grass and some roses to make it more like it used to be. I thought that cleaning up the spot would benefit everyone and was a no-brainer. Since your office was closed, I didn't say anything or ask permission from the town since there were more pressing issues at the time. I asked the Shook's caretaker and landscape crew about his permit, and they said they were told to stop work. About 2 weeks ago, so that it's 3 weeks now or something like that, the landscaper contacted the police and an officer came out to look over the situation. I told the female officer what I had done, and the landscaper had reported to Mr. Shook that I had cut down vegetation on his property, which is not true. I gave her my contact information both at home and at work and told her that I worked at the sewer department for the town. I asked the officer if I should contact Concom, and she said to do nothing until I heard from her. I've done nothing since except water the grass. I've not heard from anyone since, but the police officer said that she would be writing up a report, which I assume is available from the police department. Today, this is a week ago, I got a call from my wife saying that Mr. Shook's landscaper is putting up a sign for a Mass DEP permit number 48297. I assume that that's for the planting that he did down below the bluff next to the pond. I thought that that work associated with the permit was complete. And I'd like to point out it's been 3 years. Come May 24th of this year was 3 years anniversary. Does the planting approved by the permit extend up to the top of the bluff and to the street, and is the permit still in effect? Everyone in the Quidnet Village is happy and impressed with all the work I have done, including the head of the Quidnet Squam Association, and those that remember having the view open up as you come down the street. So where do we go from here? If I need to, I will apply for or go through the Quidnet Squam Association to apply for an after the fact permit for the work I have done. All of Quidnet is behind the clearing of the land, and I know that they would rather have the site open to public access to the view instead of an overgrown dumping ground. So I guess I'm asking for your advice. I can meet you at the site at any time or at your office, which I assume is still closed to the public. Thanks for your time, and sorry about making your life and those on the Concom more complicated during this complicated time. Charles Johnson. This last week, I wrote up an update. This last Monday, I received a letter from Mr. Shook's attorney attached to a cease and desist order from the town, giving me until Tuesday, 8 a.m. to remove everything that I have planted along with the bench, or it would be removed by Mr. Shook's landscaper. The bench was removed, but plantings remain. I was curious about how this order came about, so I looked at the video of June 11th, 2020, virtual Concom meeting. I was shocked at what was presented by Mr. Shook's attorney. None of it was true. Mr. Shook never did any of the eradication of the invasive species from the top of the bank to the edge of the street right-of-way, nor the planting shown on the project plan. A commissioner later asked Shook's attorney if I had removed all the work Mr. Shook's landscaper had done, and she said yes, that I had. I have never touched any of Mr. Shook's plantings, nor placed foot on his property to remove any vegetation. I have only cleared the area of town property from which Mr. Shook was required to remove invasive species, as well as the area within the street right-of-way where the bench was placed. It is now clear to me that Mr. Shook never intended to complete the work in this area and was happy with the overgrown state, which provided his studio privacy. I feel my work was done in good faith and for the common good of the members of the Quidnet community.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
I know that that Bill Paulson wanted to have some comments coming from the Quidnet Squam Association. I know he was waiting to be added to the meeting. I don't know if he's on now or not.
It looks like he's on. Mr. Paulson, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do, but I don't have any video. You don't have any video of me, so you need to unlock that.
We can get that done for you, hopefully.
Oh, I said, you just did it. So let's see. Oh, you've got me. Okay, good. I'm Bill Paulson. I live on 9 Saskatchewan Road. I live across the street from Charlie and Micah. They're wonderful people. They're not rich. They're salt of the earth. And Charlie gets no personal benefit out of this clearing. None. He has no view of it. It's down the street, around the corner. He did this because he thought it was the right thing to do. I've tried to do this in the past. 3 or 4 years ago, I met with Jeff multiple times. I met on site. I said, the town has neglected this right away. It's time for the town, and it's a mess. It's got a jumble of blueberries and bamboo and all that stuff, and it's got a bunch of trash, construction debris and landscaper debris have been piled on. And as in talking to the old timers here, this was a vista place. There was a bicycle rack, and there was a place where people could stand there and look out at the pond. So Charlie, being one of the old timers, and his wife Mika, who's been here on this island for 60 years in this location, set about doing what the town never refused to do. Jeff never told me no. He just never got back to me. And I think it was hard to get it done. There wasn't money, who knows? And I ran out of time in that summer. So he sent me to the land bank to see if they would ask the town to give that land to them so it could be maintained. I couldn't get anything from them. I was put on hold there, but I know this land very, very well. It is, to put the thing in perspective, Alan Shook has a cottage at the base of the bluff that is 5 feet from his property line, as opposed to the 20 feet that is a setback.
Mr. Paulson, I don't, want to sound rude, but I do want to try and focus on wetland violation issues that have occurred, and really keep the focus to that.
Okay. Well, there has been zero. There have been 8 plants, which are it's a tree that have been planted at the top of the bank. That is not where they're only supposed to be 5, and they're supposed to be at the bottom of the bank. So Mr. Shook is not adhering to the plan that he signed up for. That's not happening. That will block the view. And my question is, do you guys have the authority to grant a public real estate to a private landowner? You have that authority? Because that's what's happening here.
So, what's happened here is, unfortunately, plants were cleared from a wetland resource area, whether it's on private property, public property, it doesn't so much matter. But Mr. Shook and his team went through proper permitting with the Concom to allow them to do work on town-owned land. So that means that they would have had that sign off. And again, I want to focus more on the violations that have occurred over the winter, because that's why we're here right now.
Okay. Well, the first violation is that Shook is not adhering to the permit. He is not adhering to the permit. There have been 8 plants planted on that right of way. There's been no clearing of invasive species. And I know you don't want to talk about that, but this is a dumping ground at the top. It's been neglected by the town. So I've asked for the town to do something about it. They never have. For the past decade, it's fallen into disrepair and it's become a dumping ground for all sorts of landscaping and construction work. The permit has now been extended for another 3 years. Now, the work behind Shook's cottage was done in the first year. So he stopped doing this work. He didn't do anything on the down back. He's removed seaside grasses next to his house. He has a beach that doesn't have beach grass on it. It looks like Bermuda. So there's a little bit of he doesn't come to this with clean hands, is my point. There's supposed to be, where he has the trees planted, Virginia rose and beach plum. That's what you've agreed to let him do. He hasn't done that. Charlie has cleared it, put in some small roses on the right, repaired the 2 fences that were there originally, and put grass in. That's what he's done. And he's done a lot of cleanup and clearing at the very top, beyond the slope of the bank, on the top of this bluff. Our neighborhood is firmly behind allowing Charlie to do that, or have the town do it. We don't care. We are firmly opposed to Shook not violating the plan he agreed to. That's up to you to enforce. You don't have the resource to do your enforcement. Jeff knows what this is, and I really want 3 things from you. I want a 30-day stay of any work on that bank. I want an in-person visit from every one of you on this location, and I want a public hearing. This thing got rammed through with a lot of misinformation. At the end of that meeting, it looked like a lynching on your part. Charlie should be arrested. He should be charged with criminal trespass. He hasn't trespassed. He's been on public land. That's not trespassing. Jack Newhouse, who planted the tomato plants in that location, which were attributed to Charlie, is 8 years old. So you'll have 5, I'm sorry. So you'll have to charge him in juvenile court. We as the association are 100% for having a vista restored in that location. We don't think it impacts the bank at all. And I think if you looked at it and you do the in-person, it's a shame there wasn't enforcement when all this stuff happened, because it's been 3 years. I mean, there's been plenty of time to plant 20 plants on that bank, plenty of time. And all the planting has occurred behind Shook's Cottage. So that's happened in any stop. I know you're sighing, but you don't live here, and we've been here a long time. And this isn't our first rodeo with Mr. Shook. So I'd like those 3 things: a stay, in-person visits from each of you, and then a public hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. Well, depending if I'm on the board next week or not, you might not be getting me on the site. So that's going to be up in the air. But I also have to say, quite frequently I run into kids on trails, on land bank trails or Conservation Foundation, and they build bike jumps and things like that. And I go up to the kids and I say, do you own this land? Is this your property? And I go and explain to them that if it's not your property, if you cannot confirm that it's your property, you shouldn't be doing any alterations to it without explicit permission. So I understand that the association might find this to be a benefit, that he was cleaning out trash, but unfortunately, without explicit permission from the town, you can't always do these things. So, I think this is really an unfortunate situation that we're in. And, right now we're looking to enforce upon the clearing. Mr. Shook was given extensions on his order, so he's allowed to take more time to finish the project that he was permitted to do. So we're really, yeah.
Who will maintain Shook's landscaping that's on the public right of way?
That's a good question for the town.
Well, I don't think Shook should be allowed to do that. That's public land. He's charged with restoring the bank.
Right. So again,
Madam Chair, will I have an opportunity to respond to some of these statements at some point?
Yes. Would you like to respond right now?
Whenever you want. I just want to make sure that I have an opportunity.
Yeah. No, I think they've kind of given their presentations. So guys, we can't have this be like yelling into the camera. We have to have everybody present their side. And that's kind of the way we run things here. So, Sarah, if you would like to kind of present your case, then, commissioners will have time to ask questions and get to the bottom of this.
Okay. Here's what I would like to do. I would like
Mr. Paulson, you do not have the floor right now.
Okay.
So Sarah.
Okay. So I think it's unfortunate that the neighbors are attempting to turn this into some referendum on Mr. Shook. He's not the person who's done anything wrong here. He came in 2017. We had a series of, or at least one public hearing. He was granted with no objection an order of conditions with the town's approval to do this work. The work was actually done. I don't know why there are all these statements being made that the work wasn't done. The work was done. It was done by Seth Wilkinson. I think Jeff Carlson has spoken to Seth Wilkinson and has photographs of the work both in progress and after it was done. There were no trees shown on the Wilkinson plan because there were trees on the property. There were existing mature trees, the cedar tree in particular, on the property. Those have now been cut down. That work, the cutting down work wasn't done by Mr. Shook. The cutting of the mature tree was done by Mr. Johnson. All of the work that was required by Mr. Shook under the original order of conditions was done. It was done at a cost of $12,000 to Mr. Shook. He paid that and gifted it to the town. He now has an estimate to restore the plan back to what it was. And with your permission, we're hoping that you'll issue a friendly enforcement order, replace the cedar that was taken down. We have purchased 3 cedars. We'd like to put them in. We can put 1 in if that's all that you will allow, because 1 was cut. But of course, it won't have the same impact as the mature cedar that was cut down. This is town property, but that doesn't mean that any person in the town can go on and just randomly destroy vegetation and take it upon themselves to make improvements, plant tomato plants, put up benches. There's a process for all of that. And Mr. Shook has gone through that. He's prepared to go back and repair it. He's not using this land. He eradicated the bamboo and other vines because he was doing an eradication project on his own property. And we were told that if we didn't make sure it was eradicated from everywhere, it would just immediately grow back. So that's how this started. The bank serves its purpose. It has been undermined by what's happened to it now, and I would like to see it get replanted with the native species that you approved, and hopefully with a replacement of the cedar trees. The cost of that work is going to be another $15,000, and Mr. Shook again is willing to undertake it and gift it to the town.
Thank you, Sarah. Mr. Johnson? You're on mute.
Okay, I have to disagree. All the work was not complete.
Okay, so Mr. Johnson, we are not here to discuss whether the Shooks finished their work. They have an open permit. No, they have an open permit with the Conservation Commission right now. You know, so we can't go down that road during this discussion. You know, this discussion is really focused on the clearing that occurred without permit. And I understand that you're coming from a good place. So let's not like sully this by like talking about a permitted project. Let's really focus on what happened, what you cleared, and the path to restoration.
Okay, I'd like to go back to what exactly I cleared, because I cleared no vegetation that Mr. Shook planted. He did not do the eradication of the invasive species up on the flat part between the top of the bank and the road. That was not done. It was not touched. I pulled cinder blocks, all kinds of garbage out of there. That part of the project was not done by Mr. Shook's landscaper. I did it because I thought it was the right thing to do. And I thought that Mr. Shook was neglecting that area. And I wanted it to go back to the way it was, where everybody had a view at that point. I did cut down that cedar tree. It was not a mature, it was a mature tree, and it was 90% dead. If the commission wants me to replace that, I will do it, but I don't want it to block the view. That view was incredible, and people that remember it really wanted to go back to that.
Yeah, so we deal with vista pruning here a lot because people want their view sheds, but unfortunately that's not in our purview. And, you know, a mature cedar tree provides an like habitat value that you wouldn't even imagine. So we're not here to kind of allow vista pruning.
Well, we'd like to do some vista pruning in the future, permitted. I go through the process, and I will replace a cedar tree. The cedar tree had about 20% of life left in one little section of the tree. It's been dying for years. I understand the habitat that the cedar can provide, but there are other cedar trees. Mr. Shook took down a cedar tree on his property.
Okay, thank you. Are there any Mr. Paulson? Oh, you're on mute.
I think an in-person visit by each of you will answer the question, did Mr. Shook landscape below the top? Is he adhering to the plan that you approved? And has Charlie pulled any of the vegetation that Shook claims to have put in out? He hasn't. He hasn't been on Shook's property. He hasn't touched any of Shook's plans. He has not altered the bank at all.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commissioners? So Jeff, what do you think the path is here? Do we need to get the area that was cleared surveyed in order to try and get it restored? Do we need like a square footage? Just trying to think of the path forward.
So I've been thinking about it a lot. I think the first and fairly simple steps are to just go through. The planting plan is pretty clear for what it's supposed to be and what it's supposed to have in place. I think the first simple steps are to just do a complete and accurate count of what's there and which locations are in. I know there's a bound at the top of the bank that's pretty easily recoverable, so can kind of guesstimate where that property line is for the stuff that kind of straddles that line. But it's pretty straightforward to go out and locate the 5 arrowwood that are supposed to be within the town layout. And I mean, we can do the whole planting area in its entirety, figure out what's there and what's missing. And then I think, honestly, the expectation should be to have the permitted plan be completed and verified in total compliance with the approved plan. And that at least puts it straightforward for what it is. And in the interim, if there's other work or deviation to that permitting, there's a process to gift land or gift work to the town or to figure out how that's going to be. And if there's an alteration for what groups would like to do, there's an application process to do that. But I think the expectation of the board should be that the permits that were granted, the 2 separate permits to Mr. Shook for Mr. Shook's property and to the town property to Mr. Shook, that those plantings should all be completed and in compliance really before anything moves forward in addition.
Okay, so even in dealing, so was the land clearing outside of wetland jurisdiction then?
No, the whole area. So the top of the bank is, I'm just trying to guesstimate on the plan. I don't have my scale in my hand, but I would say it looks to me that from the bound to the corner of the road layout itself on the town property is about 13 to 14 feet, I would say. And that's to the edge of the road layout, but the top of the bank is at just past there. So the 100-foot buffer zone casts well up that road. So everything would be within jurisdiction.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. Seth?
I think that's a perfect strategy. I was a little confused about what Mr. Paulson was saying earlier about 5 versus 8 trees. It's clear to me on the landscape plan that Wilkinson submitted that there's 8 arrowwoods, 5 beech plum, 9 Virginia rose, 5 groundsel in one area, and then there's a bunch of areas that have other numbers. There's way more than 5 or 8, but I think it's pretty easy to go to the site, field locate each of those plants to see if it's in the right location, if it's the right species. It sounded like some Virginia roses might have been taken out and then new roses were put in. Those are probably Rosa rugosa, if you ask me. So make sure that we have the right species and the right number of plants based off the landscape plan, and then we can go from there.
Thank you, Seth. Any other thoughts from commissioners? Joe?
I would like to go see the site after Wilkinson or the survey has gone through and verified what's there, what's not there, what should have been there. I definitely think a site walk would be prudent. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Jeff's gonna have to go through as staff probably to confirm this. Is that true, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're going to have to verify every plant that's there. I know it's a little trickier with some of the seed mixes, but just to go through and cover the shrubs, I don't think that would be overly difficult. I mean, it would be probably a morning worth of work to get through that, but I don't think it's anything that's heavy lift. It's pretty commonly done.
Thank you, Jeff. So I have a comment from Bill Paulson's camera, but I know it's not Bill. And you're muted.
Hi, I'm using Bill's computer because my internet is down, so I was not able to request to be at the meeting.
And sorry, who are you?
I'm Micah Johnson. I'm Charles's wife. And I emailed you all earlier today a very detailed rebuttal of Sarah Alger's presentation. Is that something you all will read?
We're a very thorough commission, so yes,
Well,
we read.
And a very brief statement I want to read here. The other statement is much longer, so I'm not going to read it on camera. Okay?
Yes.
Okay. In a non-COVID world, we would not be here today. Alan Shook's permit to remove invasive species and restore native species to the town right away to Sasakaja Pond would have expired on May 24th, 2020, and Charles Johnson would not have had the free time to tackle the overgrown junk heap which covered the right of way and blocked public access to the pond. That land is a right of way, by the way. It's not just town land, it's a public right of way to the pond. But because of COVID-19, Mr. Shook had time to apply for an extension of his permit, which he received with no site inspection to ascertain the extent of his compliance over the previous 3 years of the permit and no questions asked. You all simply took everything Attorney Alger said on her client's behalf as gospel truth and never even had Charlie come in and tell his side of the story. And everybody knows that every story is two sides.
Sorry, I just have to interrupt you there. That's why you guys are here today. You know, this is your time. We have allowed you to speak on this matter.
For the cease and desist, you should have looked into things. Anyway, Charles got 2 weeks off from his job as an engineer with the sewer department with pay. Because he was still getting paid by the town, he felt guilty to work on his own project. So, with the help of 5-year-old Jack Newhouse, who was sheltering from COVID with his grandparents, Steve and Judy Newhouse, at 7 Sasakaja, Charles attacked the wild tangle of invasive species and debris that covered the town right away. There's many people in Quidnet who have photographs of that area over the last year or two, if you all would like to see them, that show it as a massive jungle of blackberries, knotweed, bamboo, and then all the debris you couldn't see because it was buried under that, but that included cinder blocks, electrical boxes, wiring, and rebar. Charlie didn't apply for a permit, but the work he did clearing the invasive species was within the purview of the permit. So he, partly at the time he got so crazy, but it was the work he did was exactly the work that was in the permit. It's just he did it for free instead of Mr. Shook paying his landscapers to do it. So in essence, Charles cleared out a dumping ground that was blocking the public right of way to the Sasakaja Pond, removed a huge tangle of invasive species and debris. He didn't trespass on Mr. Shook's land or remove any of Mr. Shook's plants. He did this exhausting work for the benefit of the community and all who visit Quidnet. No harm and much good has been done, and I just hope that Mr. Shook's extension the decision to extend his permit will be reversed because he did nothing he was supposed to do for 3 years. And as far as him giving a gift to the town, he didn't give a gift to the town.
Right,
it was
so we really need to focus on wetland issues here, you know, and clearing of land within a wetland resource area.
Issues. Why did Attorney Alger present information about the gifts to the town and this and that? Why is she permitted to introduce that information in her presentation to you?
Right, so because that was introduced last week, we're really here to have you answer what happened
No,
with your
and
hearing.
why was Attorney Alger permitted to introduce information about the benevolence of Mr. Shook's gift if I'm not allowed to read that?
Because
I mean,
I'm so all right. So that's my fault as chair that I allowed her to make that statement. Next time, I will not allow anyone to tract off of the Wetlands Protection
All right.
Act anyway. Okay.
Made. Yes, I should be able to rebut it. It's in the record. I should be able to rebut it. And the rebuttal is that Mr. Shook wanted to elevate his cottage on the pond 3 feet above the allowable height. So as a condition of getting his variance, he agreed to do that plan. It wasn't a gift. He did it so he could raise his building. So just to clarify that he's not a wonderful, benevolent person. Just, you know, I wouldn't have brought it up, but Sarah brought it up. So I'm just refuting it. And the
Sorry, Madam Chair, but can you please stop?
Yeah. So you know what, Jeff, what do you have to say?
I was just gonna say is at the end of the day, Madam Chair, whatever work did or didn't took place, or whatever motivations to do it, we have a that's in place that has a permitted condition that is the permit that we're actively holding. At the end of the day, that's what's permitted to be there. Anything else is not permitted to be there. We have a path that we've identified to get us back to that area, and that's honestly what we have in front of us. And I think it's just important for everyone involved to know that this is where this is heading, and this is the end of the road, is the permit that was issued under SE 48 2967 is the only condition that the project is complete.
That permit was never completed.
Okay, so through the chair, Jeff, do you recommend that? No. Jeff, do you recommend that the commission then makes a motion to go through with the steps that you laid out? Is that the next step for the commission?
Yeah, certainly. If that's the prerogative of the board, I mean, we can certainly follow those instructions.
Okay. Seth, you had a comment?
No, I'm really disappointed in these character assassinations, and I would make a motion to follow the directive to have staff survey the property to see if the landscape or if the plants match the landscape plans, and if not, to move forward with future actions on enforcement.
Second.
So seconded by Mark. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, so that carries unanimously. So Jeff, I guess the next step is you going out as staff and surveying what's on the ground.
Yeah, sure, and we'll have that done with a complete inventory, and I'll try to make sure that we photograph each plant that we inventory as well, so everyone can see them.
Thank you, Jeff. Mr. Johnson, do you have a question?
I have a comment.
Okay, as long as it's appropriate.
It's very appropriate. I object to the way that I've been portrayed by Sarah Alger, and the way you just muted my wife from speaking.
So I have no control over the mute. That was not me. I can assure you, I don't have those controls.
But
I'm
whoever did it wasn't appropriate.
So, no.
And the character assassination I received last week was ridiculous.
Mr. Johnson, it all needs to stop. And unfortunately, if you're not listening to the chair, that means that someone might end up muting you, because our process requires you speaking through me. So, I'm sorry that there's been negative energy from both sides of this. Hopefully we can come together. I think the commission now sees that you were not malicious in your actions, but I think then we need to be the bigger people and not, attack the other property owner. Like, we all need to be better, and hopefully we can, move forward on this.
I did not start attacking. I wasn't even represented
Yeah,
at that.
but we're gonna end it now, so it's over. It's over. So the commission has made a motion, and we will, move forward with surveying the plants on the ground and hopefully ensuring that, everything that was permitted is done, and that we, tackle this violation. Yes, Jeff.
Just one last question, I promise. For our next report next time, would you also like us to be sure of that participated in tonight's hearing? We're also invited back to be able to view or provide comment on the report? You can think about it and let me know.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe we need to send out to the public or ensure that people are on at the beginning of our meetings to go through our meeting process and how these are supposed to run, so that we're not attacking other individuals, we're not moving away from Wetlands Protection Act issues and things of that nature. But I wouldn't feel appropriate in not allowing both sides to participate. I don't know how other commissioners feel about that.
Well, we will check with the chair prior to the meeting for who to make sure we get all of that distributed to.
All right. Thank you, Jeff.
No problem. Thank you, guys.
Ian? Oh, I think you're muted.
Obviously, we want to have as open a process as possible within the bounds of civility. And so, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. All right, Maureen, did you have something to add?
Just really quick, as a active member of my neighborhood association, Nantucket, I know that it's really easy to get emotional and concerned about what's happening in your area. But the whole point of this is we have rules. We have rules to protect the environment, and that doesn't allow anybody to go off and decide they can do something, even if they see it's a horrible, horrible thing. They need to follow the rules, because we can't just let people decide what they think is best for a particular piece of land. And I hope that the neighbors can understand that, and that we have to go with what we have in front of us officially. And when you go off without, following the rules, then you're putting yourself at a disadvantage, and it really doesn't make sense to do. So I just want to acknowledge your concern, but this is not the way to do it. Thank you.
Thank you, Maureen. Okay, so that's going to bring us back in the meeting agenda, and we're going to go back to amended orders of conditions. 11 Meadow Lane LLC at 11 Meadow Lane, and this is represented by Paul Santos.
Hello, everyone. Paul Santos on behalf of the applicant, 11 Meadow Lane LLC. We're going to lighten the mood here, I hope, and have a brief conversation about invasive vine removal. This is an amended order of conditions request that I came before the commission with last meeting, in which we are seeking to remove some invasive vines that are located between the 25-foot and 50-foot setback on a piece of property that we are developing residentially. The reason we're before you is during the original approval for the order of conditions, we agreed that the area between the 25 and 50, we would treat as a no touch, and there was no work proposed. And the order specifically said that no work would occur between the 25 and 50. Hence the request for the amended order request. So the question last meeting was, what were the invasive vines and approximately what was the square footage? So Chloe Coggins of my office did a analysis of the vine area. We basically have 2 vines, both are considered invasive, Oriental Bittersweet and multiflora rose. There is, I think, some additional pictures that we did submit with the request, or the amended request. And we also did reach out to NCF with regard to confirming the types of the vines and their assessment that they basically had told Chloe, to definitely get rid of as much of the bittersweet and multiflora rose as possible. They are a nuisance in the home landscape and a serious invasive pest in natural areas. So the two questions were, what were the vines? What was the amount of material, approximately 1,000 square feet? And that's the extent of the amended order request. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Paul. Seth?
Not a question, but I would also just like to thank Paul for providing the updated photographs and information. In the updated photo, I can clearly see both the multiflora rose, the flowers are quite distinguishable, and the bittersweet. So I have full faith that this was surveyed correctly, and I thank you. I thank you for doing it, and I look forward to seeing those vines removed, as they are quite aggressive invasive plants.
Thank you, Seth. Joanne, can you unshare your screen? Thank you. Any other comments or questions from commissioners? If not, is there a motion to approve the amended order? So it looked like the motion was made by Maureen and seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal.
Aye.
Engelborg.
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding. Oh, you're muted.
Jesus wept. No, I'm
There-
not. Aye.
LaFleur.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right. So that amended order passes unanimously. I know the muted mics are getting people today.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Maybe Ian, you could get one of those Alexa things so it can do it automatically for you.
I think I better.
All right, so now we're moving on to request for determination, 15 Cliff Road LLC at 15 Cliff Road, and this is represented by Art Gasparo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is a project where there's no work that's proposed. We're right near kind of the start of Cliff Road, and we have a fully vegetated slope that the flood zone elevation intersects at the bottom. And as such, based on policy 92-1, this would be would be considered a coastal bank. And we're simply looking to confirm the resource areas. There's a vegetated wetland at the bottom. You could probably, I included the locust maps, but this is essentially the bottom, the base area is that up behind the Nantucket Hotel. And like I say, the property is right from the start of Cliff Road. The coastal bank, if you had a question, sort of why it doesn't wrap around, it has to do with the continuation of the slope on the northerly property. There's sort of a break in slope. I spent a fair amount of time out there examining that, and the consistent slope coming up the side isn't intersected at the bottom by the flood zone elevation.
Thank you.
I'm happy to take questions that you might have.
Any questions from commissioners? Jeff, was staff able to confirm this?
Yeah, I was going to say we were able to recommend the issuance of this as a positive 2A, confirming the resource area boundaries.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. So if there are no questions, is there a motion to issue a positive 2A?
Motion to approve.
Is there a second? Seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal.
Aye.
Engelborg.
Aye.
Golding.
Aye.
I skipped myself. Arisman, aye. LaFleur.
Aye.
Phillips.
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, so that passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you, Art. So that moves us on to minor mods. Lottie Leshley, QPRT, and Jan Leshley, QPRT at 65 Squam Road. And this is represented by Art.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm before you tonight with a minor modification request for work that was approved for existing residential house or property, very large property, which is, you know, mostly wetlands, has a bank and leads down to the eastern Atlantic, to the eastern shoreline. And they need 2 sets of stairs to get out of patio doors. One of the sets of stairs is located underneath an approved cantilever deck, so it doesn't actually expand the footprint outside of what was already approved. But we're just trying to make sure that with this project and close proximity to the resource areas that everything that's built has been reviewed and approved by the commission. And then they need another set of stairs. When I say set of stairs, 2 steps to get from the first floor down to grade. And the architects have come up with a rather interesting design in order to, which I included a sketch of, where they would use brackets to cantilever off the stairs so that they don't the 2 steps, so they don't actually touch the ground. And understanding, I explained to them, you know, the concern that the commission has with runoff and impervious areas. So there's only going to be, they kept them as small as they could, and there would be a gap between the boards. So we don't feel that the stairs in total are about 12 square feet each. And again, one of them, you know, is only about 12 square feet that's outside of the footprint that's already been approved. And there's, you know, no alternative really to these, having these steps. And I thought that they thought that the, you know, brackets would be better than doing stone steps or something else along those lines. And we'd be happy to address questions or concerns. I don't know if we could bring up the sketch that I included with the filing. I mean, you've probably seen it, but these are the plans, but there was actually a sketch. If you didn't see it, or let me just make sure that I included it. I think I did. That they did, that I think very, very well describes.
Yeah, I don't have it, sorry.
Oh, Jeff is kind of showing it on his screen.
There we go. But I'll put it up just in case do you want me to share my screen, Madam Chair? This was in the application, so it's not new information.
Yeah, why don't you share your screen just so if the public's watching, they can see it.
So there we go. So they would use, you know, a steel bracket like this that would support the stairs and then be lag bolted to the house. And then this would all be clear space below the steps, just to do these 2 steps, as you can see, you know, with the gap between the board, between the decking boards.
Thank you, Art. I appreciate the sketch detail. It's very helpful.
I'll give you back your screen.
All right, Joe, I know you had a question.
Not a question. I just really thought this was a very ingenious solution to a problem getting out those doorways. I think it's a great idea. So thank you, Art.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners? Okay. Seeing not, Jeff, do we have everything we need to issue the minor mod?
Yes, you do.
Okay. Is there a motion to issue the minor mod?
Motion issued.
Motion made by Joe, and was that seconded by Mark? Okay, so by roll vote, Beal?
Aye.
Leborg?
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding?
Aye.
LaFleur?
Aye.
Phillips?
Aye.
Topham?
Aye.
All right, that carries unanimously. Thank you, Art.
Thank you.
So that moves us on to certificates of compliance. We have, Jeff, should we take these 2 together or separately?
I think they're fine to do together.
Okay. So we have Amy and Michael McGowan at 10 Bassett Road, and we have SE 482299. and SC 482427. These are both represented by Art.
Thanks, Madam Chair. These were some orders of conditions back from, I think it was 2008 or 2010, the first one, which was done by another firm, and it was for work that was after the fact work that they came in and permitted. And we believe that that the conditions now essentially, match that application, and we'd ask for that to be closed. And then I had done a notice, I think it was in 2011, for a pool and some other improvements on the property, which never happened. So we're just trying to clean up the chain of title so that we don't have open orders, and that's essentially it.
Thank you, Art.
We agree.
Okay. So any questions from commissioners? Seth?
Yeah, just really quickly double checking that on the plan, the area between the 25 and the 50 that's labeled as meadow / tall grasses, those are all native, correct?
Correct.
Great.
Thank you, Seth. Any other questions from commissioners? If not, is there a motion to issue the certificate of compliance for both permits?
So moved.
As seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Erisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Great, that passes unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then that moves us on to David L. Douglas Trust at 20 Fulling Mill Road, also represented by Art Gasparo.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This was a project I worked on along with Blackwell Associates, and it was for a septic upgrade to.
Excuse me, Art, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I can't see the screen. It says it started screen sharing, but it's not showing on my computer. Does everybody else see it?
I can see it.
All right, I'll try and fix it myself then. Okay, sorry.
So this, as I was saying, is a septic upgrade within Nantucket Harbor Watershed District. And they installed essentially a entirely brand new system with elevated leach bed and septic IA component. And we received sign off from the Board of Health as the operation maintenance contracts were in place. And we included the copy of that certificate of compliance with the request for this certificate of compliance. And I believe all the work was done in substantial compliance with the order of conditions, and it really represents a good, environmental net benefit.
Thank you,
We
Art.
agree again.
Sorry, what, Jeff?
I said we agree again that it was done in compliance. I
Um,
jumped the gun, sorry.
That's all right. Any questions from commissioners? If not, is there a motion to issue the certificate?
Move the issue.
Is there a second? Seconded by Beal. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Erisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, that carries unanimously.
Thank
Thank you, Art. So that brings us on to Robert C. and Welby C. Kuritak at 312 Pulpus Road, and this is represented by Paul Santos.
Thank you, Paul Santos, on behalf of Robert and Welby Kuritak. This was an IA, or nitrogen removal system upgrade for a septic system located in the town's Harbor Watershed Protection District. It was an upgrade required by current Board of Health regulations. Work has been done and completed, and we've submitted the Board of Health certificate of compliance with the request for certificate of compliance from the Conservation Commission.
Thank you, Paul. So Jeff, what's your opinion on this one?
We also agree. It's in compliance. It's nice when the Board of Health gives us their certs and make it easier for septic systems.
Yeah. Any questions from commissioners? If not, is there a motion to issue the cert?
Motion to issue.
So motion made by Joe, seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelberg,
Aye.
Harrisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks, Paul.
Paul. So that brings us to Liberty Realty Trust at 36 North Liberty Street, represented by Don Bracken.
It says Don, but since this was his only thing, we said that we would take.
That was very nice of you.
Yeah. So this was just for the small addition on the back of the house. You see where it says stoop and steps? That was what they permitted. So that is done, and that is in compliance.
Thank you, Jeff.
No problem.
Any questions from commissioners? If there are no questions, is there a motion to issue the cert?
Motion to issue.
So motion made by Joe. Is there a second? Seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelberg,
Aye.
Harrisman, I, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
Right, that carries unanimously. So that brings us to Silver Fox Partners Real Estate LLC at 235 Nantucket Road, and Jeff is doing this one.
Yeah, so this was filed with us, and in our review, we found some issues that we were concerned with. So we're asking for this to be carried forward for at least 2 weeks, so we can try to resolve some concerns. This had some issues with some compensatory storage for the flood zone, for the pool that was permitted. And when we were going through the topography and some of the layout, we had some concerns that it was not. So we're trying to resolve those, or get more information to show us what. So.
Thank you, Jeff. Do we need to make a motion to continue this? No, it'll just continue.
No, I think we just continue it to the next meeting.
Okay. Thank you, Jeff. So that moves us on to orders of conditions. We have Chuck Rowe Nominee Trust at 25 Quays Road. And Jeff did email us orders earlier today.
As you can see, that order is really sparse. I didn't put anything down. I wasn't sure where that conversation was going to go ultimately. So I'm open for discussion. Caveat that by saying we've been asked to try to wrap up by 5 so they can meeting onto YouTube. So not to put anyone under the gun, but put under the gun.
Did this not require a waiver, Jeff?
No, it's a preset structure.
Okay. Any thoughts by commissioners? Sorry, what, Jeff?
No, I looked at some of our orders we've done for similar work, and it's kind of the similar order.
Okay.
Which property is this, Ashley?
Chuck Rowe Nominee Trust. So this is the bulkhead replacement.
Thank you.
Oh, surely we should have a discussion on whether we want to approve or deny.
Yeah, I think that's a big piece for this one.
Right.
So should we take a vote and see where the commission stands?
I think we need to.
Yeah, so I guess, Jeff, would this need to be a roll vote?
Yeah, if someone's going to make a motion to, to draft an order one way or the other, I think that'd be a lot cleaner way to do it.
Okay.
Motion issue.
Okay, is there a second? Seconded by Dave by roll vote. Beal?
What are the conditions on this one, Jeff?
For our bulkhead replacements in kind, we haven't typically had any real conditions that are there. So they just have to follow all of the protocols and things that they provided to us. But we haven't typically had a lot of additional conditions to bulkhead replacements.
Well, I'm sorry, but I think I needed a discussion on this, so I'm not prepared to vote yet. I want to hear about the Chapter 91 legality, the feasibility of a living shoreline, the problem of no extension, which will increase the erosion on the end of the property. I'm troubled by this one. I'm just not sure how to vote. I think it should be replaced, no question about it. But well, maybe not even. I don't know. I think we need to talk about it.
Okay, so I think right now we're just trying to figure out who's on the side of approval or denial based on previous discussions.
Maybe take a straw vote, maybe.
I think that's kind of what's happening. Seth, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, so sorry. I mean, the motion, procedurally, the motion was made and carried to make a vote. So I think we are compelled to take a vote.
Right.
No, he can withdraw the motion if he chooses.
He could withdraw it if he chooses.
Let me withdraw it and do a straw vote. How's that?
Okay. So by straw vote, should I still go around by roll call? Beal? It's back to you.
Shall we just do this?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, so Jeff?
I think if I may, Madam Chair, I think you should ask the question of people who would be in favor of drafting a positive. I think that's a good way to do it. And then you can at least do who would like to see a positive order and get that kind of number. That's probably the easier, question.
Thank you for that guidance. It's been a long week and I'm losing it. So who would be in favor of approving this project?
Okay. I would with conditions.
All right, so it looks like we definitely have 4 to approve, which is the majority. So now we can go through the conditions and see what conditions people would like to put on there. So do commissioners have any thoughts on conditions for this project? Mark?
Were we convinced that we have no jurisdiction to require a easement across the front?
It sounds like no, that's within the Chapter 91 licensing.
I'm troubled by that, but I mean, we can't kill it based upon that, really. Then.
Well, we haven't actually had a legal opinion on it, and despite the fact that we didn't have the backwards and forwards, because Jeff said that on that particular 1982 Chapter 91. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jeff. I thought you said 1982. Right.
Yeah, the license was issued in 19. But
right. So, you know, irrespective of whether the high tide line just happens to cross one small section of it, I feel that you could argue that it is, and I understand the difference between the Wetland Protection Act and the Chapter 91 regulations, but there clearly is grounds to say that you need access. And I would like a formal legal opinion on it, because it really bothers me that we're sort of being held to this sort of hostage to this aspect. And I know Jeff and Dave, I mean, Joe and Dave disagree with me. So I don't know whether they would approve to have a legal opinion or not, but it really bothers me too at this juncture. So.
Do you have a comment?
Yeah, I would just say trust me, Ian, I'm a messenger here. I 100% am with you that we should be protecting and encouraging as much public access as possible. I think in the infill zone, those rights are clearly defined and protected within the Chapter 91 legislation, and not necessarily as much through the Wetlands Protection Act. I know that's not the answer that you want to hear, but I think that's
what
exactly. But I think that's the answer, and I think they still have to go through that process. Hope that process would cover the you're worried about.
Thank you, Jeff. Seth?
As you know from the vote, I'm against this project, but it's obviously the sense of the board for it to pass. I think that if it is going to pass, the conditions as written are fine. I will put aside my personal opinion here, and I think the conditions are fine. And also, in terms of a legal opinion, I think since we've closed the public hearing, the record is closed as well. So it's a little bit too late for that.
Thank you, Seth. Joe, did you have something to say?
I was going to say before Jeff raised his hand, but I agree with everything that Jeff said. So I think that it's got another step to go through, and they'll make sure that it's taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. So with that, if there's no conditions to change or anything to amend, is there a motion to approve this order as drafted?
Motion to approve.
I think Maureen got that one first and Joe got the second. Next time, Joe. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Opposed.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Opposed.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
So that carries with Commissioners Engelborg and Golding opposed. And that brings us on to Croquet Pitch LLC at 24 West Street, and that's SE 483305. So Jeff, this is one that I think you were off for the discussion, but we talked about adding a condition to submit soil tests and to not allow fertilizer within the 25.
Okay, let me bring it up on my screen here. It's one nice thing about actually being in the office is I can reliably get to the drafts on my computer. So I think what you're saying is we would have a condition 20 that a yearly soil test shall be provided for the commission to review.
Mm-hmm.
And then 23, no fertilizer shall be allowed to be used within the 25-foot buffer zone.
Yeah, and as you say that, I truly don't know how you train landscapers to like stop their spreader at the 25, but they'll just have to do that.
Yeah.
And mines.
Maybe they'll just choose to not fertilize, actually.
That would be the best thing.
So.
Any other thoughts on this one? So if there are no other thoughts, is there a motion to approve as amended?
So moved, Madam Chair.
All right, so Ian got that one. Is there a second? Seconded by Joe. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, so that carries unanimously. We don't have the town of Nantucket, so that brings us on to other business, approval of minutes for June 11th, 2020.
Motion to approve.
Second.
All right, so by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelborg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye. Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye. Thank you, Terry.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
So that carries unanimously, and yes, thank you, Terry, for the always great minutes.
She's the best.
She is the best. We're so lucky to have her. So that brings us on to discussion of SBPF 77 through 122. Are we going to discuss that tonight?
No, we had requested some information as far as that sand delivery goes, and we're still putting that together. I apologize for not having that done, but it's the last week especially has been kind of nuts. So I don't think I need to say any more to that, but We just haven't had a chance to get to it. We've been trying to get through as much as possible, but there's been a lot of other things that are, frankly, more time sensitive that have been going on. So we'll catch up. So if it's all right with you guys, I'd just like to carry it to the 7-9 meeting.
Yeah, I think that's good. So that moves us on to reports. Crack.
So, Crack, I'm going to read an email that Vince Murphy sent to Erica on June 23rd, which says, please find attached the finalized recommendation from Crack to the Select Board. This is a limited term recommendation until the Coastal Resilience Plan with its recommendations replace it. The key point of the recommendation is to make town departments and any contractors, town departments aware of sea level rise and plan accordingly as detailed in the recommendation. And basically the recommendation is 2 pages and that is broken down into sea level rise projections, storm frequency and impact on sea level rise, and storm surge.
Thank you, Ian.
And I believe that Seth talked himself into a job as of next month, since he pointed out that the member was supposed to have a scientific background, which I barely know how to turn a light bulb on.
Well, we'll see at the next meeting who gets appointed for all those boards.
Right.
Thank you, Ian. That moves us on to CPC,
No, nothing to add.
NP and EDC.
Nothing.
Okay. So commissioners' comments. I just want to start, and I hope I don't get sad. I don't know what's going to happen Monday, obviously, but I so appreciate everybody's support, and I've just loved serving on the Conservation Commission. I feel like we are probably one of the more important commissions on Nantucket. I just feel like we are always grounded in our decisions, and we are always respectful of each other and applicants. And I don't necessarily see that at other town boards. And I just think that it's something that this commission should, carry forward into the future, because we're great. And I think back to when I got on this commission and just before I got on, and there had been 3 scientists. There were Sarah Octay, Ernie Steinhauer, and Jen Carberg. And I essentially kind of replaced Jen Carberg as the scientist. And, I think back to July 2019, and this commission had 3 scientists. Seth had just been appointed. I was on the board, and we had Ernie Steinhauer. And it definitely worries me moving forward if this commission is truly left with just, one individual with that science background. But of course, the commission doesn't have much control over what the select board does. But again, I've just loved serving with all of you guys and learning from your diverse backgrounds and your perspectives. So that's what I have to say. Any other commissioner comments, Ian?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would like to propose 3 chairs for your chairmanship. Hip, hip.
Hooray.
Hey.
Hip, hip.
Hooray. Hooray.
Hip, hip.
Hooray.
Hooray.
Ashley, I think you've done an exemplary job. You were outstanding. I hope you don't go away, but you can replace me next year in 2021. Let's go, girl. Thank you for everything. And so we'll see what money brings, but I want to thank you as well. So you've just done an amazing job. And I think this last time, ever since you took the chair, it's been very impressive to work with you. I think you've done an amazing job in these troubling COVID times. So thank you for being you.
Thank you.
I would also just like to say that my entire term on the position, on the chair so far has been during Ashley's tenure as chair. And I think she's led by example, and she's shown what professionalism and dedication is to this board. We'll see what happens with Monday. Hopefully this isn't your last meeting, but if it is, it's been an absolute pleasure to serve not only with you, but each and every member on this board, so thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And
Maureen?
yeah, I'd just like to add, I think one of the nicest things about last night was hearing from your students that, you know, if you have to leave this commission, you are still impacting our kids coming along and understanding about the environment. And I know you are unlikely to stop that in the near future. And so I want to thank you for that as well. And it was very heartening to hear what they had to say about you. So just thank you so much. I've learned more in this year. I mean, it's great to learn a lot when you're as old as I am, just because you kind of think maybe you know stuff and it's like, Jesus Louise, I knew nothing. So anyway, thank you so much.
Thank you, Maureen. All right. If there aren't any other commissioners' comments, we'll move on to Mark.
I just have one that is for Jeff, if I may. Let me know, Jeff, when you're going out to Aquidnet, and I'll meet you out there if that's possible.
I've gotten a number of requests already to meet me out there to do that. So I may actually, if it's okay with everybody, I may set up a time where I might just go out there to just go through it once by myself for a few minutes and then have another one to go through it. I just, in my experience, site visits like that where you want to kind of take the time to go through and pick through it, if you do it with a lot of people that are there, it's just really difficult. But I'm more than happy to go out there with anybody and go through it. But I may try to go do it once by myself and then schedule another time, because I'm sure, as you guys can expect, all of the parties involved tonight are like, we want to meet you there and all this, that it's going to lead to a lot of name calling and a lot of me refereeing and not a lot of me of counting plants and doing what I'm supposed to be out there to do. So, but Mark, definitely, I'll try to get a hold of you. I don't mind as much with commissioners, but I may set up a separate walkthrough for the public that are interested, in effort to not be out there for like 3 days.
You might need a mediator if you're going out there with both parties.
I will tell you once, I've actually done a site visit with a police officer with me. So this is not that time, I don't think, but we've gone to that length before. So only once.
Any other, Mark, do you have another comment?
Yeah, I just had one, actually. I've served on this and for the town of Nantucket and a variety of boards, and I've never experienced anything quite so shabby. That's all I'm going to say.
Definitely not the way I expected to potentially be going off this board and to be spending my last week, but you know, it's life. You have to roll with the punches and see where you land. So if
You're loved, kid.
Thanks, Joe. All right, so if there are no other commissioners' comments, we'll move it to administrator staff reports.
All right, I'm going to go really fast because we're supposed to be off by 5 so they can watch us on YouTube for town meeting, and that's in like 8 minutes. So really quickly, keep in mind that I know we do have appointments on Monday. I know everyone is following along very actively with that. But also keep in mind that after we do that, we have to reaffirm all of our appointments to the other committees that we are on. So like NP and EDC, CPC, CRAC. I know we have a lot of incumbents that are there, but if people are interested in, or if people are interested in switching or getting out or getting in, I know it's not in a very ideal cycle for like CPC because you're kind of in the middle of it. But keep in mind, we have to do that. NP and EDC makes us like send them a formal letter every July for who our representative is. So keep that in mind. If nothing changes, we still have to send them a letter, but we just need to kind of run through that. And then the other one, just to drop off, I sent all of you today something I had sent to Ashley a couple weeks ago. I've been kind of brainstorming as far as looking at potential violations and what was going on. And she had some suggestions. I still need to send it to council to kind of get a look at to make sure that it's even really legal to do. But I at least wanted to kind of I'd said we'd get something to you guys, kind of get it put together and kind of put my thoughts on paper and then try to run it through a little bit of a filter for an example to see what it would be. So if people have comments on that, don't have to comment on it now. If you could just send me your thoughts on emails, whether or not you think it's pretty good. I ran a lot of other different examples with it too, just to kind of ballpark what the finding range could be with it. I think it's good because it's a set penalty, so I think it makes it, and it's within for certain things, because you'd essentially be issuing out a bunch of little ones all pulled together. But if people feel like it's the right kind of idea or kind of addresses what we were looking for, I'll put in our request for legal services to have counsel look at that and see what they think. And they may go, no way, that is crazy. But at least we kind of can get it bounded and get it reviewed and would feel better about knowing what that looks like. So those were just my thoughts. So that's all I really had to say. People already saw it, think it's great. That's fine too. So
Thank you,
I sent
Jeff.
it late today.
Did everybody at least see that in their email?
Mhm.
Yeah. Awesome. So Jeff, I'm sure you'll get comments from people.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Or if I didn't think of something that would be good to add. I tried to keep it pretty broad and kind of all encompassing to what we see and some little nuisance things that are there. But tried to stay to kind of bigger spectrum things. So again, if anyone has any thoughts, that'd be great.
Thank you, Jeff. So with that, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Madam Chair.
All right, seconded by Dave. So by roll vote, Beal,
Aye.
Engelberg,
Aye.
Arisman, aye, Golding,
Aye.
LaFleur,
Aye.
Phillips,
Aye.
Topham.
Aye.
All right, so this meeting is adjourned literally just in time for town meeting.
Thanks, guys.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.